There are any number of ways to interpret American politics, but there seems to be a general consensus that tribalism is a serious issue of the decade. And the question may be asked of us, whose side are you on? I prefer not to contribute to a cultural problem if I can avoid it. In an environment where group identification can impede good judgment, I don't believe it would be especially helpful here to pledge steadfast allegiance to any group or individual. I'm more interested in the proliferation of useful ideas than where they come from. If it is ever the case that ideological bias prevents us from presenting accurate information and analysis, I'd like to do what I can to address that bias. If we're unable to see it, then it comes to the audience to keep it in mind. In the interest of facilitating this through transparency, we'll be taking a political compass test from the site politicalcompass.org. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this political compass deals with two axes, left versus right, and authoritarianism versus libertarianism. I'm not aware of anyone who vouches for this test being especially comprehensive or accurate, but as of now, it seems to be the closest thing available to a standard gauge for political viewpoints. Hopefully, this will at least provide a more nuanced representation of our positions than a political label would. Now, with that said, welcome to Section 32, Delivering Intel to the Public. Episode 2, The Political Compass. So, number 1. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations.
Yes. So what did you rate that?
Yeah, I'm going to say agree.
I'm going to go a little further. I said strongly agree. I think one of the things that really worries me about the future is the fact that these large multinational conglomerates are able to effectively spread about what amounts to corporate malfeasance by kind of jumping through jurisdictions, preying on jurisdictions that aren't as powerful as the corporation itself. I think in a lot of ways, you see the stuff like Apple in Ireland or Nestle in Africa, and you see I think one of the biggest problems with globalization and part of why so many people are taking issue with it is the fact that all these multinationals have been screwing over various different independent countries for the sake of their bottom line. Mm-hmm. Because no one country can take them to task, they get away with it.
Yeah, and the tax haven stuff is a real issue. You remember that the Panama Paper stuff?
Exactly.
Nothing happened after that came out.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the thing that's stopping me from saying strongly agree is just that it's not, I guess just because I don't like how the question is phrased. But
I mean, I see your point. It does kind of frame it like, okay, you have your poison, which is economic globalization now. Now, can you make it slightly less bad or just outright terrible? Is kind of how it presents that question.
Yeah, it's like it does imply that it's inevitable. So.
Oh, and I mean, but are they wrong in thinking that? I'm not really sure they are.
I don't know. Yeah. Well,
we'll find out.
Okay, let's get on to the next question.
I think this question's a lot simpler.
Do you want to take turns reading the questions?
Sure thing.
Okay.
So, this question is: I would always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. I don't know about you. I was a disagree on that one.
Yeah.
Unthinking patriotism is no better than unthinking hatred of your country. You should be trying to hold your government accountable.
Yeah, it's like you can see it's in the question whether it was right or wrong. The primary issue is it right or is it wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm not going to say strongly disagree because I think it's appropriate to have a bias for your country over other countries because that's what everyone else is going to be doing.
And I think this will play into the next question a little bit. But yeah, okay. I agree.
Yeah. All right. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it.
What did you have for that?
Well, I guess I'll say disagree, actually. I mean, like, I understand the point that's being made, but pride is, basically a feeling, and it's not necessarily irrational to, just decide that, hey, this is a useful feeling to have. I might as well take advantage of it, even if it's not grounded in something rational.
I also said disagree for a slightly different reason. I kind of think, at the core of being a psychologically healthy human, having pride in your local community is important. And I kind of
Hmm.
see patriotism or pride, I guess you would say, in being part of your country as a natural extension to that. You know,
Hmm.
I've lived outside of the United States for roughly 2 years of my life. And nothing made me more happy to be in the US and to be an American than being an American in a different country, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know,
It
I like this country. I think we're not perfect, but we got the right plan, if that makes sense.
it was kind of weird being in China and realizing just how seldomly people talk about politics.
Oh yeah. You think China's bad, go to Sweden.
Oh man.
Everyone's like by American standards borderline autistic in terms of like social interactions. So like if you have a conversation with someone out of the blue, they get really weird about it. It's quite entertaining. All right.
Okay.
So getting to the probably the biggest I'm going to call it the most bait in this entire
Yeah.
quiz. Our
Yeah.
race has many superior qualities compared with other races. So I don't know about you, but I came down to strongly disagree on this. I think firmly believe, almost to the point of like, a foundational moral precept that the differences in outcome between races is much more a product of culture than it has anything to do with any like biological or IQ or racial element. You know, I don't think it's a race thing. I firmly believe these differences in outcome is you can always boil it down to being a problem with culture.
Hmm. Now, I feel like I'm going to lose a lot of the audience on this one, but I just got to be honest with where I am right now.
Yeah,
I'm going to say agree. Um,
really.
the things you brought up, that I do think that a lot of things are grounded in biology, maybe some more things than we might expect, and that and when it comes down to culture, you have to think about like, okay, where does the culture come from?
But I mean, it's not like this is kind of what drove me to think it's culture more than race. Is you look at like when you really educate yourself on these on different cultural subgroups and whatnot. Let's use just because it's the obvious thing that's in everyone's mind. Let's just use Africa as an example.
Hmm.
Africa has a lot of really deep set cultural problems in sub-Saharan Africa, right? In terms of
Hmm.
tribal feuds, in terms of rampant communalism. I mean, the stuff you hear out of the people who do these, you know, retreats or they go work as mission workers or whatnot in sub-Saharan Africa, you learn just how much it's the society that is being kind of, I guess you would say, enabled. But there are within Africa different tribes that choose to ignore that. The Igbo in Nigeria are a classic example,
Hmm.
or Ethiopians. I really do think it's less just racial than it is cultural. Because I mean, Igbo, if I recall correctly, I'm not as well versed in uh, African anthropology as I would like to be, but if I recall correctly, the Igbo are just another Bantu offshoot, like the Kenyans and in Mozambique and all the tribes that moved into South Africa after the Dutch moved there. Like I really don't think it's a racial thing. It really is just like if you have a culture that creates or incentives for people to kind of not succeed,
Hmm.
then you won't succeed.
Yeah.
you know,
And
the, yeah.
I will say that I just want to clarify that the question is it's not whether the race is completely superior in every dimension.
But it
You
has
know that
many, yeah.
yeah, like you could flip it around and like point to uh like another race and ask like you could also agree and just pick other dimensions and it wouldn't necessarily be a contradiction. Like I think evolution adapts different life forms to different environments.
Hmm.
So in those environments they're they are more fit. So
Okay. Do you want to read the next one?
the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
So where do you land on that?
Um I guess just disagree. I mean, it seems like sort of a question about strategy more than like friendship.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
I this is one of there are a few in this quiz, but this is one where it's like I really kind of lean neutral, but I picked a side, so I disagree with like about 30 little asterisks, right?
Hmm.
You know, in the short term, it can be useful. To bring up a historical example, us allying with the Soviet Union to defeat Nazi Germany, that was
Yeah.
useful in the short term.
Sure.
However, I also kind of agree with Harry Truman, who said when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, we should just let them grind up against each other instead of bailing out the USSR. So it's like, I kind of agree that like in the short term, sure, but I don't like the idea of basing who your long-term allies are out of like this idea of who you think your bigger enemy is and finding their enemies. For example, the American alliance with Saudi Arabia. We don't like Iran a lot more than we don't like the Saudis. Ergo, Saudis are our friends, but they're really not.
Yeah. I have some feelings about our alliance with Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is off topic, but I'm just going to bring it up. Did you see that last week Trump tweeted in Arabic
Oh boy.
to
That's
to,
gonna
to the Saudis?
that's got to be a reaction.
It was pretty entertaining.
Oh boy. Yeah, this is we're having an entertaining decade
We are.
for sure.
So let's move to the next
Yeah.
extremely dated feeling question. Military
Military
action that defines international law is sometimes justified.
defies international law.
Yes.
Well, military action does define international law, but
Oh, did I say define? Oops.
yeah.
Oops.
I'll agree. I'll agree with that one. Okay. I mean, I guess if we're talking about like pragmatically, does does this apply to any real life situation? I don't think that's likely. But in terms of just general philosophy, I guess I'll say agree
Interesting.
because
Okay.
like when it comes down to like conceivably there could be a situation where some bureaucratic nonsense happens where okay, uh, no military action is legal according to our special international law, and then you get into a situation where a certain country can't act defensively without violating international law. Like, I don't think that's realistic, but conceivably possible.
Okay.
So I have to say agree based on something like that.
Interesting. I also wound up this is another one that I was really on the fence about, but I wound up leaning towards agree, but for very different reasons. So mentally, I keep referring to this as the Iraq War question because that's kind of how it's framed. Like,
Mhm.
you ignored the UN, you invaded Iraq. Was that good or bad? So I do kind of think that a responsible superpower or a responsible country on any level has some kind of responsibility to not blatantly violate international norms, but I also really don't think the UN is such a I'm going to call it a morally consistent organization
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
really give much of a shit about what international law means when it comes to war sometimes. So, in the
Hmm.
case of grievous war crimes, disagree. Disagree. It's not justified. In the case of
Yeah.
the UN's being a tit about a particular war, I'm kind of like agree,
Yeah.
more or less. It depends on the war, obviously, but
Yeah, when it comes to something like well, we tortured some folks, like
yeah,
that's not acceptable.
I still think it's kind of. I mean, this is me being a bit of a purist, but I do think it's kind of an injustice that neither Bush nor Cheney got dragged in front of the Hague. I know why they didn't,
Yeah.
but they should have been,
Oh,
in my
that
opinion.
would have been amazing. I would have loved that.
Well, I mean, let's be real. If the UN even attempted that, it would very quickly expose just how powerless the UN is as an organization.
Yeah.
We went Bush for war crimes. Yeah, okay, get fucked.
Okay. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment.
I I feel like a bit of a hypocrite on this one because I spend way too much time watching pop science shit on YouTube.
Yeah.
Way too much time.
Kurzgesagt?
For me, it's what's that? The Scott Manley, the dude, the space dude.
Hmm.
In any case, despite that, I do very much believe, strongly agree. I think the entertainment aspect of particularly when it comes to news kind of dissemination, that has taken over the incentives and the mindset, the obsession with ratings and melodrama, good narratives. I think it's ushered in this kind of post-truth era where no one believes any story that doesn't come from their favorite like talking head. You know.
Yeah. Like read that book, Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna be shilling that book forever. It's definitely a big part of this whole thing. Um, I'm just gonna say agree just because instead of strongly agree because like all that stuff you mentioned, all that stuff we're talking about, like it is a real problem, real big problem when people can't separate when they're being informed and when they're being entertained. But I don't think it's necessarily a big problem if you're entertained while you're learning something.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can have things like if you can learn something about history by playing uh, grand strategy games, that's fine. That's pretty cool.
Oh no, definitely true. Like I said,
Yeah.
I in as much as I think there's a problem, I recognize I'm 100% part of the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
all right.
As long as we're not the fun police, you know.
I'll never be the
Okay.
fun police. No one likes the fun police. So the next
People,
question. Yeah, you can go ahead.
okay, sorry.
No, it's all good.
People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Uh,
Yes. Uh, this is me at my most left wing. Strongly agree. Every populist movement in the entire planet right now that's happening is because the lower classes of the developed world are incredibly upset at their relative decline since World War II compared to what's been happening for the upper classes in developed worlds countries.
mhm. Yeah, I think how true this is depends on what levels of class you're talking about and like what kinds of uh, what kinds of nationalities. Like if we're talking about the top 1%, yeah, they're more their group identity is going to be more based on class than nationality because they can afford to take airplane flights and hobnob and do all this international stuff. But I think the lower middle to lower class like there's more of an opportunity to form bonds based on nationality or community identity.
I mean, I see your point. Um, for me, it's more. I see a lot of the balkanization of the poor between ethnic or national lines is part of how the haves in this metaphor managed to convince the have-nots to fight each other instead of
Mm-hmm.
fighting them.
Yeah, yeah, but the thing is, they can be convinced. So
Oh, very easily. I
yeah.
mean, I'm genuinely surprised. You know, it'd be very interesting. This is one of my weird, like, I've been reading a lot about the Austro-Hungarian Empire and like the 19th century, and I've been reading a lot of history stuff about that. And something I find kind of fascinating as like a historical what if is what if the Austrians knew how to do modern day like ethnic balkanization tactics
Mm-hmm.
of pushing identity politics on Austro-Hungarians? Would Austria-Hungary still survive? Because that was, I mean, I think the Austrians were like 15% of the total population, but they were basically an ethnic aristocracy in
Mm-hmm.
that country. And like, can you imagine how long they would have like if you put Austria-Hungary and moved it to like 2019, how fine they would be just making all of like the Serbs and Croats hate each other, make the Hungarians and the Bosnians hate each other, and just keep flaming that kind of shit to stay in power. I find it
Huh.
really interesting. It's kind of like an intellectual exercise.
Yeah, that's I think that one's beyond me. So
Yeah, no, I just
I'll reserve my opinion.
so the next question says controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. So what did you have for that?
uh I don't feel that I'm especially qualified to give an answer, but looking at what's happening in Venezuela with the
Hmm.
hyperinflation, yeah, uh, I'll just say agree. Um, I'll also say that how exactly would you control unemployment without uh, meddling too much in the economy and controlling people's choices?
Well, let me tackle the first half of this question, then I'll definitely get to that.
Okay.
Um, I also agreed, under the guise that inflation, more than any other group, it hits the working class the hardest because their purchasing power is directly reduced.
Hmm.
So, in a scenario where the economy is in trouble, where both inflation and unemployment are rising, I would rather try and take action to curb inflation so the people who are still employed have better purchasing power, and people who are unemployed, who are presumably stuck living off savings, have they have a longer timeline to find employment again. Right? That was my logic.
Sure.
Um, when it comes to the how do you ensure low unemployment, I really this is one thing where I do not think direct government intervention can fix it. I don't think you can get short of pulling out like New Deal style, like go dig some holes with a shovel kind of job programs, which, uh, for those who don't know, economists are very mixed on whether or not the New Deal succeeded in fixing the Great Depression in that sense. I think it's better for a government to try and either directly subsidize consumer spending to drive further profit, to drive more job growth, and that kind of thing, or to simply try and minimize the impact of high unemployment on a society, whether that's some sort of like intermediate welfare program or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a fine line between kind of incentivizing further unemployment if you get too involved versus just letting the economy fall over if you don't get involved at all, right?
Yeah. And there's something about this question that brings up something I'd like to think about. Like, uh, so consider two different situations. You're in a context where inflation is a big problem and unemployment is not such a big problem compared to uh, inflation not being such a big problem and unemployment being a huge problem, your
Mhm.
your answer is probably going to be different. But does that mean that you necessarily have a different political opinion?
I mean, I believe that political opinions are firmly motivated not just by ideology. Part of the problem with modern politics is people try and focus on an ideology driving all political opinions.
Hmm.
I believe to some extent it's always going to be motivated by strategy. And that's where you get into the strategic aspect of political opinion. Okay, so inflation's really high, which means I can't buy anything. Do I really want the government trying to force lower unemployment, or do I want the government trying to force better wage inflation? I care more about wage inflation if I have a job. If I don't have a job, I care more about unemployment. Like, it's a very strategic thing.
Yeah. Well, anyway, next
Yeah.
question. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation.
This one was pretty interesting for me. What
Mhm.
did you wind up thinking, though?
Yeah, I'm gonna say strongly agree. Um, I think generally the people on the top and huge multinationals, they're tend to be a little bit more interested in short-term profits.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if we're talking about the environment, that's a multi-generational issue that's a big deal. And there needs to be some sort of, we need to figure out, like, what needs to be done in order to protect that. Though I will say I don't necessarily trust the government to be able to handle something like that delicately as it stands now.
Now, this is interesting because this is like, I think, by my recollection, this is the first one where I'm more moderate than you on on an issue. Um, I just had agree, and my main reasoning for just being agree instead of strongly agree is 100% I agree with your assessment that the people in charge of these companies very often are completely incapable, if not actively disincentivized, from trying to consider the environmental impact of their work. However, I do think that really only applies to holding corporations in check, and I'm very, very skeptical of a lot of, I'm going to call it green legislation that is targeted more at the actions of individuals than it
Yeah.
is on the action of corporations.
Yeah, that's not a great thing. Like, hey, that was a part of how the Yellow Vest protests got started, wasn't it?
Yellow vest protests, you see it all throughout this proposed Green New Deal. It's
Oh God, the Green
um,
New Deal.
there's a phrase I've heard that I really love called a watermelon.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you know what that term means.
Is it green on the outside, red on the inside?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with the intentions of a lot of honest, genuine environmentalist activists.
Yeah.
I'm very skeptical of people who are like, we need to have a massive government overhaul about how you live your life to do this. I'm kind of like,
Yeah. Are you sure? Are you
is this
sure?
about the environment or is this about power? I think the latter.
Yeah, and it's a real shame too because it delegitimizes like people who are honestly concerned about where the environment is headed.
Absolutely.
Like it's hard to address that when people suspect you of being a watermelon.
Like I expect the Green New Deal will be a an episode of its own, but as a short thing, I'm very concerned about the impact that's going to have on any sort of environmentalist efforts going forward because of how ludicrous the Green New Deal wound up being.
Yeah.
Anyways, the next
Jesus.
question.
Okay.
This one should be a pretty quick, like, no-brainer for both of us. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need, is a fundamentally good idea. Now, I don't know about you, but I strongly disagree with that assertion.
I'll I'll just say disagree on that because I feel like it works as it can work as a personal code of conduct and it can work as uh, a philosophy for like small communes or families or something like that. The problem comes when you try to scale that to large populations of people who will never meet.
I like how you just summarized the problem with communism as well. It has scaling issues.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yep. No, fully agree. What's the next one?
It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product.
Yeah, this one I thought was kind of weird. I wound
Uh,
up rating it disagree. Um,
yeah,
Mostly because it's like, you know,
it's not a big deal.
it's not a big deal when you pay for bottled water. You're paying for the convenience. You're paying
Yeah,
for having you forgot your bottle of water that you have that's just like a reusable can. So you need to grab something from the convenience store or you need to
yeah.
take something on a backpacking trip. Like it's not like I don't know. I don't see it as some indicative. There are way better examples of consumerism gone awry than bottled water.
Yeah, you really should not feel entitled to someone else's labor. So I will admit it is kind of silly that that the branding is something that makes a difference.
Oh,
Like
sure.
the whole thing of people drinking Fiji water for the aesthetic or whatever, it is pretty ridiculous and
Just tastes like tap water, guys.
and the plastic, that's a concern. Like
I mean, I get concerns with it from an environmentalist standpoint,
yeah.
or a I don't want to spend $3 for water. That's ridiculous standpoint. On board, but we live in a society because bottled water's a thing. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
a bit too far.
bottled water is a pretty minor issue as far as these things go.
It's a useful convenience.
Mm. Okay. Well, land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold.
Okay, I have my take, but I really want to hear yours first.
I mean, basically disagree. Like, I think people should be allowed to have their uh, private property.
Hmm.
They should be able to own the land that their house is on. So not so they could have the freedom to build nuclear reactors on it or anything like that, but so they have some sort of
You can take my
sense.
private 3 Mile Island from my cold dead hands.
Yeah, yeah, that's where it starts getting a little bit weird. The scaling issues. Like we're gonna be in dire straits if we have like just a few mega corporations that own everything. And we're dealing with like company towns and weird stuff like that.
Yeah, that's not good.
So I'm not gonna say strongly disagree.
So I actually wound up going strongly disagree on this one.
Okay.
My logic being that, ignoring the whole mega corporation owning too much land aspect, because I think that has a whole lot of other issues aside from the fundamental principle of land ownership.
Hmm.
Um, Owning land and owning property has been the single most effective way for people to springboard up the class mobility ladder. And I think it's one of the best things that the Western world came up with in terms of allowing people to better themselves through merit. And I think getting rid of land property, getting rid of property rights in that aspect is just asking for another entrenched aristocracy over a whole bunch of neo feudal serfs.
Hmm.
That's my attitude.
All right. Oh, and I'll have to say that national parks are a cool thing.
National
Like
parks are great.
we do need to have forests somewhere in the world if we want to breathe. So
Yes.
yeah.
No, no, that's not meant as at all as a slam on the national forest and national park system. Those are great.
Oh
I'm glad
yeah.
they
Yeah.
exist. Teddy Roosevelt's best idea, in my personal opinion. You know,
Mhm.
they're great. Don't get rid of those. But
Yeah.
people should be able to buy a house, own property. It is a huge aspect of how people who are of lower income pass on wealth to the next generation. So the next question is: it is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. What did you have for that?
I guess I'll go with agree. Like it, it's a case by case thing. There are situations where it's like, people moving money from one place to another. There are times where that doesn't have an obvious economic benefit to other people, but it can be important that small business owners are able to get a loan for what they're trying to do, so their business can make more money in the future.
Mm-hmm. This is another one of the ones I had a really hard time deciding on a side. I wound up very, very weakly saying yes, I agree, but I do think I recognize the problem, and I don't like the whole fact that a lot of people essentially get paid for busy work, but at the same time, having worked in tech, having worked in the Silicon Valley, I don't think people understand just how much of a middle class white collar jobs amount to essentially busy work. That getting mad at people for just pushing pencils around, you would invalidate a whole huge sector of the economy. So,
Yeah.
from a perspective of wanting more jobs, I kind of a little bit disagree, but
Yeah,
I do
I
recognize
mean,
there's a problem.
like there needs to be resources that get to people at some point, and like I'm not gonna. I think it's bad to just be resentful of people just because they have money.
Hmm.
Like when it gets to a ridiculous degree, where like you're making money by uh, helping out with the tax havens and stuff like that. That kind of sucks, but
Well, I
yeah,
mean, if you want to talk about manipulating money and contributing nothing to society, I mean, that's very clearly are the bankers a legitimate profession kind of question.
yeah,
So I don't know. I mean, I see a role for the finance industry. I think in a lot of ways,
sure,
stock trading has ruined good business strategy for many companies. But this is another one of those. It exists for a reason, and it's not perfect, but it's better than not existing. I don't know.
yeah. Financial regulation needs to have some teeth behind it.
Oh, we definitely need better regulation, but the underlying like existence of the discipline, I get it. You know, it
Yeah,
benefits more than just the uber rich to have people who can finance some crazy startup or some random shop you want to open. You know, it benefits us to have people who are able to finance those kind of things. And this whole question kind of seemed to me to very much be just a question of, is the finance industry legitimate? Which ultimately, yes,
yeah.
I think so.
Okay. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade.
So I actually wound up agreeing with that.
Uh-huh.
My logic being free trade is great in principle. Free trade kind of operates on the presumption that the countries in that deal have similar values, have similar cost of living, have similar standards when it comes to workplace regulations. That's why free trade works great between us and, say, the EU.
Mm-hmm.
It's also why it does not at all work great between us and, say, Southeast Asia or China or India. I think unless you want to see the complete disappearance of the working class in the United States outside of just like retail work, protectionism is necessary to ensure that we are still able to build our steel or build our cars or build what have you and be competitive, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I get concerns that it's just kind of holding up dying industries, but I don't see the global market as an equal playing field, and I do kind of see protectionism as like necessary to level it to some extent.
Okay. So, yeah, this is really a question that I don't know very much about. So I guess it's based on a lot of ignorance. I basically just looked at the Wikipedia page for protectionism and saw that a majority of economists said that protectionism mostly stifles economic growth.
Well,
So I had
point.
disagreed
Yeah.
just based on that. But now I guess you could say, like, okay, so is the scope of this question related to just trade and the economic action, or can you expand it to like international strategy?
I'd say it's mostly probably just based on trade. International strategy, I mean, it's more protectionism has strategic ramifications rather than inherently protectionism is a strategic component or a component of a foreign policy or geopolitical strategy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that impacts it, but it's not like a core component of it. In any case, this is one that I had drilled into my head in business school. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver profits to its shareholders. What did you rate that?
I'll say disagree. I guess we have to think about how social responsibility is defined. Like I don't think the Gillette ad is very appropriate. Like I don't think it's good for a company to start using its advertising department to just start propagandizing certain social and political viewpoints.
Interesting. I didn't really think of it from a woke capital standpoint at all.
That's becoming more relevant as
it is.
time. Yeah.
I straight rated disagree. It's true in the abstract sense that really at the end of the day, all that matters is you're making your shareholders money. But my main kind of criticism and the reason why I don't like this ideology being so embraced by boardrooms around the country is the long-time viability of companies declines the more and more they adhere to this ideology. The more and more you think, all that matters is I deliver quarterly impacts, I deliver quarterly returns. It drives you to make dumb decisions. It drives you to piss off your existing customer base, and inevitably, the whole company falls apart because you destroyed the appeal of your product in an attempt to make it regularly profitable. You can see this, for example, in a big way in the whole video game industry right now. ZeniMax, EA, Activision Blizzard are all like cratering in stock valuation right now after several really bad cases of them pushing more than anything else to find a way to be delivering profit consistently. And so the fundamental concept, I think, is accurate. You just can't make that your only driving mindset because you will piss off your customer base in the process of doing that.
Yeah.
Unless you're IBM and you don't have customers that are normal people, in which case do that however long you want.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll say, social responsibility can include like, don't do arms deals where you're, arming dictators or things like that. Don't screw up the environment. Don't defraud people. Like that, pretty basic stuff.
Oh, you just reminded me
consider.
of another. Yeah, you reminded me of another great example of the consequences of this mindset being taken to the nth degree. Look at how many people are flocking to credit unions over major banks right now. That's entirely because the banks tried too hard to do that. And because they crashed the economy 10 years ago. But,
Wasn't there some Proud Boy that got, like, his Chase accounts? Yeah.
That's financial payment processors are now cutting off your bank account if you aren't woke, which
that's kind of dystopian. I'm gonna say, yeah, that's I mean, not not to be an alarmist or anything, but I get a little concerned when people say I'm not allowed to have money based on politics.
Well, and that's the really kind of alarming thing is it happened multiple times now. Like the guy getting his bank account nuked, that's a new low. But like
Yeah.
so many, for example, every time an alternative to one of the big social media sites, whether it be BitChute or Gab or what have you, as like alternatives to Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, as they arise, they inevitably get targeted by uh, payment processors to basically, Visa, MasterCard, to have their account revoked, to be shut down by their DNS host, by the payment processor. Like, that's genuinely alarming. You don't want to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I don't want large companies determining what I can and cannot say. So,
Exactly.
okay. The rich are too highly taxed.
Yeah, what did you have for this one?
It's a very broad statement. I
Yeah.
don't think I can apply it to everywhere, so I guess I'll just say disagree. I mean, wasn't there some nonsense going on in New York where the rich were starting to leave because the taxes are too high?
Not starting. They've been moving into New Jersey and Connecticut for literally decades now, but yes.
Yeah, like once the taxes get that high, what you're trying to do is counterproductive. Like you're getting less revenue from the rich. So don't do that.
Yeah. Wasn't it like Cuomo who said, "God help us if the rich leave"?
Yeah.
Our entire state's screwed.
Yeah.
I have kind of I wound up rating this disagree.
Mhm.
And I'm not like a tax the 1%, 70% type or anything like that, but
Mhm.
there are some realities we have to recognize, which is that capital flight is easier than it has ever been. People keep pointing to like the tax rate in the 50s, but in the 50s, America was the only viable payment processor left in the country. It was that of the Ruskies. You weren't going to go do it anywhere else, right?
Mhm.
Now we have the Caymans, we have the Virgins, we have the Switzerlands, we have all these different areas where people can store capital, Panama. Um, so I kind of I do think the rich are not taxed enough, but it's mostly because I think a lot of these, and people don't really recognize this, but a lot of these like tax the rich ventures, they don't affect the 1%. They don't affect the people with enough money to be politically connected. They affect the upper middle class more than anyone else. Like statistically, my parents
Yeah.
count as part of the 1%, right? They're in
Mhm.
that region to count as part of 1%. And they pay double Mitt Romney's tax bill. I think that is the case. I paid double Bernie Sanders' tax bill. I don't make that much money. But if I'm paying, I mean, Bernie Sanders only paid like 12% in the tax statement he released to for the 2016 campaign, and I paid easily 25. Like, I don't know. I think there's definitely, and I agree with the mindset that there's an argument for a more progressive tax structure and something like that. I'm just not sure these efforts to implement it wind up actually hitting the people that everyone wanting to implement it thinks it'll hit. It just goes one rung lower.
Yeah. Although I guess you could try to we could interpret this statement as just sort of um, like a more um, like separate it from reality a little bit and just think morally like if it could be done without causing extra problems, like is it ethical for uh, the upper class, like the billionaires? Like, is it ethical to be a billionaire?
Um, I don't like attributing ethics to a certain level of income. I
Yeah.
still believe, for the most part, we operate in a meritocracy, and
Uh-huh.
the people who are like ludicrously rich have done something to deserve it. Like, I do believe uh, Bill Gates earned his fortune. I believe, as skeezy and weird as he is, Bezos earned his fortune.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't like the idea of saying that having a certain amount of money is immoral because I think that disincentivizes people to do great things. I do think, though, in an ideal situation, ignoring the mechanics of implementing it, having a bigger social responsibility when you've been that successful matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say that's not necessarily a position I'm advocating for. It's just one that I've heard around these days, so I thought it might be good to address it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you know what I would like to see? I would like to see the hyper wealthy just apply their self-interest to just, the future of humanity. Just
Yeah.
start investing in, making society more productive and, help out where a little bit of capital here and there might be a good thing.
That's why, by and large, I approve of what Bill Gates has done with his fortune. I
Yeah.
think he's done a lot of great work with it. Elon Musk is kind of similar, but a bit more glitzy, Hollywoody.
Yeah.
He's a little bit more like into the whole we're gonna go to space and we're gonna build my crazy hyperloop and it'll never ever get built, but we're gonna talk about it endlessly.
I mean, we do need to get into space at some point, or we're all gonna die. I mean, not in this generation, but humanity at some point eventually.
Totally. There's I like to follow weird groups on Twitter to kind of get an idea of where everyone's mind is at.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this small little like almost anarcho-capitalist sphere that I kind of follow. And they're very entertaining. But one guy had a point that it still sticks in my head where he said we cannot go into another dark age. All the useful minerals and all the useful resources have already been harvested. All the easy to access stuff has been harvested.
Mm-hmm.
We can't go back on the technological scale, right? And I don't know what it was about that particular phrase, but it just kind of stuck in my head, and I was like, wow, yeah. We need to go to space soon.
I want that helium-3 on the moon.
There you go.
I want it. I want my Dyson sphere, damn it.
No, you don't. The Earth would freeze. You want another star system's Dyson sphere.
Sure, yeah.
That we can like beam energy back to Earth somehow. So the next question is...
Someone smarter than us will figure it out. I
There
hope.
you go.
We're just trying not to break the planet until that.
Born too late to explore the sea, born too early to explore the stars.
Born just in time to argue about politics.
You mean to make new memes?
Yeah,
So-
well, that's kind of the same thing to some extent.
Embarrassingly so, yes. The next question reads, those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. And I don't know about you, but I rated that one agree. It seems
Yeah.
kind of like a no duh.
Agree. Yeah, it does suck that, someone can just happen to get stuck with some terrible, expensive disease and there's, no way for them to pay off medical expenses, but doctors need to make a living and they need an incentive to put in the work. So,
Well, and I've always looked at it from like, okay, you want people to have health care. Great. Thumbs up. I agree with you.
yeah.
We want to have a good minimum standard. That's the goal. If you want to pay through the nose to go, I don't know, pull a Keith Richards and have your entire bloodstream, put through a dialysis machine while you take in some 24-year-old's blood because you've done way too much heroin over the years and you just kind of need to do that because you're an old rock star, go for it. Pay for it.
Sure. Yeah.
God with you.
Yeah. Let's see. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Yeah. I guess agree.
I took this. I keep like I always have like a particular like industry that these questions remind me of, and this one in particular reminded me of the media. And
Yeah.
from that one, I kind of came to this thing of, I almost think libel and slander laws, maybe not to like the point of how the UK is at, but I almost think that we should be relaxing libel and slander laws in this country to make it easier for Joe Schmo who gets like, slandered, or I guess it'd be libel because it's all in print, by
Nick Sandman.
what?
Nick Sandman.
Nick Sandman, there's so many people at this point.
Oh yeah.
I think defamation in libel cases should be kind of somewhat easier to push in this country because you really have to have, like, you bring up Nick Sandman. I think the Covington case might be the first time in a long time someone has successfully sued the media for libel. And it was a particularly egregious case to be even like court worthy. So I don't know. I almost think we need to make the standards a little lighter and kind of put the fear of, litigation into the hearts of some of these entities. But that's just me.
Yeah, I do think we might get into some sketchy territory if powerful politicians are allowed to mount up a solid case against. Yeah, so
agree. Yes, my main concern is that of normal citizens, not like
Sure.
elected officials.
Yeah.
So here's an
Okay.
interesting one. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies.
Yeah, strongly agree.
Same.
Yeah, I don't like monopolies.
I hate monopolies, and back when I was younger, I used to have this mindset that, like, capitalism and socialism are like a yin-yang thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of socialism is to curb the worst excesses of capitalism, the worst of which is monopolies.
Yeah.
By far. So, that's one thing I agree with the Social Democrats on is you need one of the government's most important responsibilities is to enforce a free market.
Mm-hmm. And hey, there are some natural monopolies that are just fine, like when it comes to communications, or like I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for there to be like a competing series of phone lines that go throughout the whole. I don't know.
I'm 50-50 on that because I agree with you when it comes to a lot of utilities. You don't need multiple gas organizations. Yeah. You don't need multiple power organizations or water. I'm a little on the more communication focused stuff. I think you should have
when it comes to social media, yeah.
Sure. Not just social media. I'm just talking communication in general, and phone lines are still a method of communication. I think if, having seen some of the, scammy phone plans offered in rural areas in Colorado when I was a kid, I think you should have the option to pick between different phone companies and different internet companies. I think communication stuff, you should have multiple options. But that's me.
Okay. Yeah, I'm open to the idea of figuring out a more nuanced position on monopolies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in general, they're pretty shitty. So
yes.
Okay. The freer the market, the freer the people.
Agree. Generally.
Yeah, generally. Like, there are some weird cases where the government tries to ban something really stupid from the market, or someone gets a bee in their bonnet about some sort of media that's like, oh, think of the children. If they listen to rap music, that bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, I really agree with, again, the caveat that I kind of think it's the government's job to be enforcing the free market, because
mm-hmm.
if you have, and this is where I dispute with a lot of the more anarcho-capitalists or more extreme libertarians, is if you have a genuinely free market, it just turns into a corporate oligopoly really quick.
Yeah.
You need someone to wield the strength of the collective little guy against the massive corporations.
Yep.
And that's literally the government's job, is wielding the collective strength of the little guy against whatever affects us. So,
Yeah.
or it should be. It really isn't in practice. Okay.
Okay.
So now we
next
get
page.
into the social questions.
This is
Ooh.
fun. Oh, abortion.
yes.
That's a
That's not a landmine topic at all. So I'll read it. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. So I have an idea what you probably rated that, but I want to hear what you rated it.
I rated this strongly disagree. The idea of it being always illegal, that's going to be a problem, because when there's demand for something, it's gonna crop up somewhere, and it's probably going to be of lower quality, not as highly regulated. Just generally bad things are going to happen. But I'm not saying I like abortion, but
I also tend to find that absolutives, like always illegal in legislation, rarely work out well.
Yeah.
I was a little more moderate than you on this one. In part because I'm troubled by what I see in the modern pro-choice movement, but I did rate it disagree. And for all the societal reasons you listed, the danger of back alley abortions, the societal benefits of people not getting married at 15 to have sex finally, I agree with those, but I do have some serious concerns with the level, with the weird, like, death culty vibes a lot of the pro-choice movement has taken in recent years.
Yeah.
I think it's a factor of social media and, like, extreme statements always getting upvoted the most, if it were.
Yeah. The whole, what was it, like some hashtag shout your abortion?
Yeah, I despise shout your abortion. I view it as incredibly macabre, and like an abortion is supposed to be a tragedy.
Yeah.
It's a necessary evil. You do not have to have an abortion to be a good feminist. You do not have to have an abortion to be a good, left-wing woman. These are not required things, and celebrating it is very macabre in my mind.
Yeah. Like, and there was that thing about what was it about the post-birth stuff?
Yeah,
there was some
got
legislation
drowned out by all the blackface scandals, but
yeah.
So, for those who don't know, the governor of Virginia, Northam, I forget his first name, was stumping for the Virginia Democratic Party's new pro-choice bill, which essentially said that post-birth abortions for those with what was the term they used? Deformities. Kids who had Down syndrome, or people who were like medically not fully formed as infants, that it was okay to just kind of not even really kill them, just let them expire on the table, which is very dark.
Yeah.
And then, of course, immediately after, I almost wonder if it was planned, but that's me being a bit of a conspiracy freak. A ton of race-related scandals erupted within the Virginia Democratic Party, and now pretty much everyone short of the Republican Speaker of the House is implicated in some scandal or another right now.
Yeah, it's like I think we can agree that if you kill the baby after it's born, that counts as murder. It's not an abortion anymore.
It's like literal infanticide.
Yeah. So.
And the other bit that got me was all this focus on like it should be the mother's choice in the moment. And I'm like, have you ever talked to a hormonal pregnant woman? And do you really think? I mean, I don't mean this like as a women are dumber statement. I mean this literally in a sense of you're swimming in a sea of hormones and going through a lot of emotional issues. Heavily pregnant women are not rational actors.
Yeah.
You do not want to put the life and death of an infant in their hands because they're not capable of making that decision most of the time.
Yeah, like don't ask me complicated moral questions when I'm like, don't go back in time and do that to me when I'm going through puberty.
Yeah, exactly. So the next question, which I think is going to have pretty simple answers from both of us. All authorities should be questioned.
Strongly agree.
Same.
That's kind of the whole point of what we're doing here. So, yeah, it like if you won't tolerate your authority being questioned, you have no business having that authority.
Well, and on the other end of it, if you never question the authority of those around you, I don't even mean it like in a malicious, I'm a rebel way. I just mean if you don't ever like take a minute to think for yourself about what you're being encouraged to think or do from an authority figure, you're just a sheep.
Yeah.
You're not living, you don't exist as a moral actor.
You're
just there.
You might even say that describes an NPC.
NPCs.
Yeah. Okay. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
I mean, I kind of, before I even finished reading that question, I finished the quote. It leaves the whole world blind. I voted disagree.
Well, that's not where it comes from originally. That's Hammurabi's code, right?
No, I know. And, I'm sure that was great in the Bronze Age. But one of the things that is essential in our society, and I think it's something we don't engage in enough, I think it's one of the worst aspects of this whole social media witch hunt atmosphere we exist in, is forgiveness is required for a functioning society. If you don't have forgiveness, then one fuck up and you're done. You're out. You have no recourse. You have no reason to really try anything, and then you do crazy shit like jump over fences and start protesting illegal immigration on a House of Representative member's lawn. If you just get cut out and you're unable to be reformed in any way, you turn into a radical. Eye for an eye just creates more crazy extremists.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to this statement about like the punishment should fit the crime. It should be there should be some proportionality. There's an element to that that's all right, but it's like in certain extreme cases, it's like, okay, there's certain crimes that are just so terrible you can't have a society that punishes them equally without becoming just an uncivilized society.
You and I are going to have a lot of fun when we get to the rehabilitation discussion for prisoners. I'm going to hold off responding until we get there.
Yeah. So, So I'm putting disagree on this one, and like oh gosh, the whole notion of how are you defining justice and what is punishment supposed to be ethically? It is tricky.
Yeah. We'll get there when we talk about prison stuff in the next segment. So,
all right.
The next question is, pardon me. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis.
I guess agree. Like, I don't think they should be expected to. In certain cases, it might be a nice thing if people vote and decide, like, yeah, okay, that one needs some funding, but like it's generally better if people vote with their wallets a lot of the time.
I guess I'm of two minds on this one. I also very weakly said agree, but so I see merit in wanting like things that I think are useful for society via my bias. Things like natural history museums, science museums, things like that, I can absolutely see kind of like, okay, yeah, we want to have that subsidized or funded by the government available for people to educate themselves to learn. All this aside, the reason why like the Pacific Science Center exists, all the societal benefits we get from that being there, right? I also do think that a lot of that and legislation pushing that has kind of just turned into a scam to make uninteresting artists a living by pandering to the people who are responsible for handing out government grants. So I'm kind of like
that's not
50-50
fun.
on it. It's a good idea and concept that has a very flawed execution. And I haven't decided yet whether or not I think the execution is flawed enough to justify not bothering with the idea. Because when I was a little kid, in the summers, every 3 weeks, I was going to the Natural History Museum in Denver. I lived there. I loved that museum. I devoured it. And it wouldn't be there if it weren't for the state of Colorado.
Yeah.
It's not fully privately funded. There's government money going into that. And so much that I learned about natural history, I learned in that museum. So, like I said, I'm 50-50.
Yeah, I mean, like
It's a good idea. I wish could be executed better.
yeah, museums can be great for, education, and they can, hey, like sometimes they're necessary to preserve certain artifacts.
Absolutely.
Like
I've seen King Tut's mummy. I wouldn't have
yeah.
seen that if he didn't tour through the Denver Natural History Museum when I was a kid.
That's crazy stuff. Like I'd pay some taxes to make sure that stuff is available.
Yeah.
It's awesome. That's the story of humanity right there. So I want to keep it around.
So is the overall kind of conclusion, it's a good idea, needs some improvement?
More or less, yeah. It's like we can't like demand that we can't say it's a categorical moral imperative that we pay taxes for museums.
Yeah.
Like, first things first, we got to figure out how to get the next meal.
Yeah. What's the next question?
Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory.
I disagree.
Yeah, this one was a hard one for me to figure out. Like, I mean, I don't want to, like, I feel like an adult that doesn't know how to take care of himself is going to be more of a burden than whatever you're doing to educate children to make sure they turn into adults that can take care of themselves. But when it comes to public schools being compulsory or something like that, it's like you might be able to figure out a way to get a better education in some other way. So
you and I approached it from very different perspectives. This is where I came at it from. I also disagree, but my attitude was this: anyone in school in most states is most of the time under the age of majority. They're not legal adults yet.
Mm-hmm.
Some may get there halfway through high school, depending on the state. But when you have someone underneath the age of majority, you've already decided they aren't capable or mature enough to be fully fledged moral actors. They can't make their own decisions. That's what the legal concept of the age of majority is all about, right? It's when you're old enough to make your own decisions. So my attitude is we don't let them decide to get married. We don't let them decide to have sex with an adult. We don't decide to do all sorts of stuff when they're underage. Why do we let them decide not to go to school? And the way you phrased it kind of reminded me of a way back when I was in college. There was a channel I used to watch called Vlogbrothers, where one guy had a pretty interesting statement about the benefit of education, which is, I support public education because I don't want to live in a society full of stupid people.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating to live in a society full of stupid people. So it's a combination of the two. We've already legally decided they can't make their own decisions, and it's for society's benefit that we have more educated people. So
wait. This might be a little confusing because there's a negative in there. So the question is, schools should not make it compulsory? And if you disagree, you're saying they should make it compulsory.
Yeah, I do think they should make it compulsory. Like I said, They don't.
Oh, maybe I got it wrong.
They're not fully
Oh,
fledged moral
I
actors.
think.
They're underage.
Oh, I think I was the one that got it wrong then. So
Yeah.
I might change it to agree on this one.
Yeah.
Like I think it should be required that children get an education, but I think there should be some sort of freedom in terms of like there should be we should have our minds open to different ways that can happen.
I'm
Um,
with you there on like secondary education, and I'm with you there on like getting a GED. But unless you've actually dropped out, I think truancy is still a valid thing to enforce.
yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll leave it at disagree.
Okay.
Okay.
So the next question, which I'm sure will not at all be controversial, is
I'm already triggered.
all people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be super surprising I rated that one disagree.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like it's another case by case thing. Like you could have a situation where there's two populations that are of equal size of like two different ethnic groups that have an extremely xenophobic culture, and if you try to get them to integrate all at once, you're just gonna start violence, and that's not good.
This is
But
the question that I think much more like a similar topic in the last podcast. I'm going to kind of get in hot water for pointing out a downside to something that I still think is a good thing to do regardless.
yeah,
I think fundamentally for expanding one's worldview, for reinforcing your moral attitude, your personal philosophy, as it were, you have to encounter things you're not familiar with. I think
yeah,
that experience with quote unquote the other is fundamental to developing as a person and having an adult psyche. However, I will admit a consequence of doing this and having this on a societal level is in cosmopolitan areas, there's less trust in your neighbor. There's a bigger tendency for social isolation, a lot of like community building kind of like programs or groups, whether it be the church, whether it be your local community center, what have you. I have a hard time kind of surviving in those environments. So there's a lot of downsides to doing it, but I think in a world where we can fly across the planet in 17 hours, you have to still do it. You have to
yeah,
encounter the other. You have to have your reckoning with them. You have to learn from them. And through learning from them, you learn more about yourself.
yeah, yeah. You don't know. You really don't know what kind of person you are until you have the opportunity to compare yourself to another person.
I think I've said it before, but I would not have understood how unique and special I think the United States is if I hadn't lived in both Japan and Sweden outside of the US. I would not have understood what I was missing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will agree that, there are certain advantages that a monoculture has.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you could ask the question like what to what degree between a monoculture and a multiculture is the healthiest? Like
Well,
I don't think
yeah.
it should all be one way or the other.
This is where I think the propagandized version of the US is the best example. One of the
Hmm.
I really think we hit the mark. And there's a lot of some South American countries have had similar things, but what works the best is when you have this monoculture that is very importantly not ethnically based. You
Yeah.
just have a monoculture. What's the US's monoculture? We are explorers.
Freedom!
We are obsessed with liberty. We do our own thing. Fuck you. I do what I want. And then what we have, and this is why I think the US was such a successful experiment in this fashion, is we have all these different little subcultures. You know, you go back to the 19th century, it's the Italians and the Irish and the Germans and the Spadeheads. I'm sorry, the Swedes. It's and the African Americans and the, you know, what Latinos existed in the United States at the time, and they have all their different like little things that we like, and they figure out a way to push it forward to make it work, and you take what you like from those subcultures and integrate it into the greater monoculture and become more of a cultural juggernaut through it. I really don't think if the US was just a bunch of Anglo-Saxons who revolted from England and then never let anyone in for 200 years, I don't think everyone would be wearing blue jeans and listening to rock and roll. I don't think we'd have rock and roll. You know.
So what you're saying is diversity is our strength?
It is, but not in the way anyone who loves diversity advocates it for, because you need a true
forced
pot.
diversity is no good.
It's not even forced diversity. You need the melting pot. You need the ability to have that cultures kind of rubbing up against each other and conflicting. I've been kind of mentally referring to a lot of the way diversity advocates talk about it now as salad bar diversity. Everything is its own little jar. You don't mix them. They don't touch each other. They're in their own little thing. And then you just assemble it and eat your thing at the end of the day. Like, it's not, you need like it should be a stew. It should be a gumbo, damn it. Another thing, like gumbo. You know how we got gumbo? A bunch of drunk French people moved in with blacks. I'm telling you.
Yeah. I mean, like, in terms of like the whole span of human history, like we haven't had an environment like America for very long.
True.
And there's all sorts of different combinations of like ethnicity and culture and ideas that, you know, there might be something very interesting to come out of it that we just haven't had the opportunity to see yet.
I don't know. I think like mankind's supposed xenophobia is a bit overstated historically. I mean, do you realize how we got rid of Neanderthals? It wasn't just killing them. We fucked them out of existence. Europeans have like some percentage of like. I'm telling you, we have a inbuilt love for the unfamiliar, and it's by letting that love for unfamiliarity and all the awkwardness and weirdness that comes with it, is by letting that happen that pushes us to true acceptance and tolerance. It's not this, well, I don't want to culturally appropriate you, or I don't want to tread on your beliefs. It's you got to have the shit talking. You got to have the teasing. You got to have the, you know, I don't get your food, you know. People hate this movie. I'm not entirely sure I understand why, but Green Book came out recently, right? And Green Book is sappy and Oscar bait and a lot of things. But there's a scene in it that I really loved where the Italian main character basically tells the black guy that he's driving around in the South, I'm more black than you. And they get in an argument. And I'm like, yes, good, perfect. Yes, have that argument. I want to see it happen. And then they understand each other better. They apologize and they move on. You know, you got to have that. You got to have people you got to give people license to be an ass.
Yeah.
And realize they were an ass.
Yeah. And you got to be prepared to deal with the kind of person that won't apologize.
Sure. You know, that'll happen too. And that also tells you more about that person. I just, this trepidation we have about offending people or about kind of saying the wrong thing and having these massively over the top consequences heaped upon us. I'm worried about it because I think it doesn't fix racism. It makes racism.
Yeah. It's like, if no one's going to appropriate your culture, it's going to die at some point. So,
you know, people stopped appropriating, I don't know, Assyrian culture. Have you heard anything about them? Exactly. Yeah. Be like the Babylonians. Take the minority groups from areas you conquer and move them into your capital.
Oh, and something you were saying about what were they? The Neanderthals, like they were bred out of The same sort of thing has happened with like the Mongolians and the Chinese.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think there are ethnic Mongolians anymore. I don't
yeah,
think so.
yeah. There's like Mongolian tribes that have like taken over China, and after a few generations, their descendants basically became Chinese, and it's like, oh well, what was the point of that?
Yeah, that's what happened to the Yuan dynasty. Poor Kublai. He didn't know what was going to happen to his children. I think anyway, that dynasty was really short lived. I think only like 5 emperors reigned after Kublai. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Jesus, man, you are really well read.
I'm a history nerd, man. I love Mongols. I mean, come on, they're the biggest land empire on the planet. Like, they're fascinating. Like, did you know? I think it's like 1 in 47 people in Asia are a descendant of Genghis Khan,
Yeah, that stuff's hilarious.
and
I
that's
mean,
like in Asia, which means they're including the Indians.
yeah,
Jeez.
that's the what that's got to be the world record for most fecund man in human history.
Uh, Pretty sure. I've heard some stories about Charlemagne, but Charlemagne didn't conquer nearly as wide an area or as many people. So, anyway,
Yeah.
the next
Okay.
we're a little bit off topic.
Yeah.
The next question.
Next one.
Uh,
Good.
yeah, go ahead.
Good. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. What do you think about this one?
I find this is going to me being kind of like a little bit condescending because I have a lot of experience dealing with small kids. You know, I babysat my way through high school. Um,
I was a kindergarten teacher for like 2 years.
there you go. So
Yeah.
you know, like kids are kind of retarded
Yeah.
and sometimes really hard to kind of get to stop doing whatever dumb thing they're doing.
Mhm.
I'm of the opinion. My attitude is it's something you don't keep off the table. It's something you reserve from when like the kid's engaging in something that's about to actually cause them or someone else harm, like
Mhm.
physical harm. You know,
Yeah.
as a kid, I only ever got spanked when I was doing something that was actively dangerous, and my parents had to basically make me stop. And I kind of get on board with it in that sense. Um, I don't think it should be a frequent thing as a parent, but definitely I think it's not like the idea that any time a kid is spanked, it's some horrific incident of child abuse. I'm not on board with that. So
Yeah.
I really agree.
Like yeah, a light spank, that's really not the worst thing in the world, and I do think there might be something to like bringing that element of reality into their awareness, like hey, you know what, there's consequences for stuff and it might affect you, but
Yeah,
I think you can I think you can I think you can, and I think when you see an opportunity to avoid physical punishment, you should take that and make that in itself the lesson of like, hey, if you get creative, you can avoid uh, situations where you're just imposing your will through physical force.
absolutely. I
And
remember an awful thing my parents used to do was whenever I was being terrible, instead of like spanking me or something, there was this like little fish tank we had in our house, and I had to go sit underneath the fish tank. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go to my room. I couldn't entertain myself. I just had to sit under the fish tank, and they'd like come find me a little bit later.
yeah,
And that was maddening.
yeah, you can just black pill your kids as a punishment.
There you go.
Tell them something horrific. Yeah, so I'm gonna put strongly disagree, because I've heard of some I've heard there's been some research done, and there's not really any positive outcomes that anyone's been able to demonstrate as a result from parents who spank their children.
Hmm.
Like I'm open to the idea that there may be some studies that come out that that prove something different, but just based on the evidence, I'm going with strongly disagree.
Sure. And
And
just to make it like clear, I mean, I'm not advocating liberal use of spanking. In
yeah,
my
sure.
mind, it's like an emergency only kind of thing.
Yeah, I think
They're-
that's respectable.
So the next one says, it's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Now, I don't know about you, but I couldn't think of anything else to put except agree.
Yeah, I'm putting strongly agree.
Yeah.
That absolutely happens, and it starts at a very young age, I'm sure.
Well, and
Like-
it's not just like it happens, it's necessary for psychological development. You have to
Sure.
know how to keep secrets because, spoiler warning, no one ever tells 100% the truth.
Yeah,
Everyone is putting on some kind of public face when they interact with people around them, and you have to learn how to do that. It's important.
yeah. I mean, I if or when I have kids, like ideally, I would like to establish, a parent-child relationship where they know that I've already seen some really weird stuff that humanity is capable of, and I would much rather they let me know what's going on if they're going through something difficult, because I might have a useful perspective on it.
Sure, establish yourself as like a trusted counselor, guidance counselor. I don't know how to phrase it, but
Yeah,
that they can talk to you. But I mean, it's just there are some parents who get really weird about their kids having things they don't want to tell them about, and
Yeah.
it's like you gotta
respect privacy.
you have to let them be people.
Absolutely.
They're not your little project. It
Yeah,
feels
you're-
like it sometimes, but they're not.
You're building them up to be an adult. You're not trying to you shouldn't make them a good kid for their adult life.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of part of the issue with our generation, I think.
I don't know if that's what I would boil it down to, but that's definitely an element of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I'm not gonna
Too many helicopter bombs and whatnot.
I'll say I think that's an element of it. I'm not saying that all millennials are spineless, blah blah blah. That's
You're a
it's
millennial.
ridiculous. Yeah. Like I'm a little spineless, but I'm I'm trying to account for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense.
I'm guessing both you and I are strongly agree on that.
Yeah.
I do actually, just because I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about when it comes to marijuana legalization, but I'm curious your thoughts. Like, where do you think, especially in the event that he wins re-election, that marijuana legalization or further marijuana criminalization is going to be something that Trump tackles in his second term? Assuming he gets it. When he has no more elections to win.
I don't know. I guess he might do that. Like, I'm not really sure how he would be incentivized to do it. Like, do you think he would just want to do that because he decided that it should be done, or just for the hell of it, or?
Well, I have a couple things that make me wonder if it's not something that the Republican Party, not really, let's avoid saying Trump. That was a mistake on my part. I don't really think it'll be a Trump fuel thing if it happens. It's going to be just a general Republican initiative.
Mm-hmm.
But the logic is, in my mind, one, personally, he is quite anti-inebriants, right? He's a teetotaler. He's kind of a weird germaphobe. Yet he eats McDonald's. I don't get it. If I was a germaphobe, I don't think I could eat McDonald's, but okay. But it's also, there's a lot of, I'm going to call it politicking from the more moral majority remnants, the social conservatives within the Republican Party, for some kind of more weighty treatment of the drug war in the wake of the opioid crisis. And I wonder if that would not impact the efforts by states across the country to legalize marijuana, because we're now at the point, we're far enough into this game that the financial benefits are starting to become apparent, right? And there's nothing that politicians respond better to than money.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, there's a lot of stuff. I'm very curious. Should he win re-election and he doesn't have to face re-election, and the Republicans have some kind of like wiggle room? Because you saw it happen with Obama after 2012. You saw it happen with Bush after 2004. When a president has been re-elected and they know no matter what, there's a new person who's going to have to fight for the office the next time.
Mm-hmm.
Parties in general become a little more agenda pushy and a little more like relaxed and trying to actually get their stuff through while they're still in power, right? I don't know. Do you think it's feasible, or?
I think eventually people are gonna just. I think it's going to be more and more acceptable in American culture, and the politicians will catch up at some point.
All right.
I don't know. I won't make any statements in terms of like predictions as to when that would happen. I don't know enough to be confident about that, but
Cool.
I guess I'll just say I don't know, and we'll move on.
Right. The next question reads, the prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs.
I guess I'll put disagree. Like, I think I will say the schools are pretty much derelict in their responsibility if they're not doing that. But I think we're missing something if we decide that is the prime function. Like, I think the prime function of schooling should be prepare the kids to be functional adults and responsible citizens.
Sure. I also rate it disagree. My attitude was more, there's definitely, I think the problem with higher education in particular is less that, we're pushing people the wrong way and more we're pushing people to the wrong institutions. I think there's definitely a place and a need for more academic or esoteric disciplines. You need people who study history. You need people who study philosophy. Anything underscore studies you can probably get rid of, but
yeah,
there's a place for more academic, higher learning. I think the problem is less, because I kind of view this question as, what's the point of college? Why does everyone go to college, right?
Yeah.
And from that perspective, keeping in mind that no one gives a shit about your high school degree anymore, by and large.
Mm-hmm.
I think our main issue is more we're pushing too many people to 4-year academic institutions and not to trade schools. So I would say the primary function of schooling should be to make you like a reasonable citizen, but we also shouldn't be pushing people to go to college to get a job. If your goal is to get a job and your grades aren't great, look into being a tradesman,
Yeah.
That's kind of where I came from.
Or, if you know how to get a good job and you can just start on that early.
Yeah. I mean, how many of the most prominent startups in the last 25 years were by high school or college dropouts? Some of the biggest ones.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that question myself. Okay.
Yeah. So,
people with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. So,
so how do you feel about eugenics?
Well,
tell me your opinion on eugenics.
Glad that you've asked that question, because I've got a program all drawn up. We got big plans, people. Okay, seriously though, this is fucked up. Strongly disagree.
Interesting. Okay. Why strongly disagree? Out of a liberty question, or? What was the main motivator?
It's a liberty thing. Like you should not like have any sort of power structure in place that's preventing people from I mean, if we're to like, you shouldn't get kids pregnant for Christ's sake, but yeah, like you can't, like, the question of how you define serious inheritable disabilities, that's really sketchy territory, and I don't want the government involved in it. But I will say that I do think it's important for a culture to, assign some sort of social stigma to the people who know they have a hereditable disease and choose to reproduce anyway, if it's especially malignant. Like, if you're just going to doom the kids you have to be totally incapable of taking care of themselves because of this, or it's going to be like a massive amount of suffering, people should encourage them not to do that.
I find it very interesting how you and I are basically of the same mind about the logic, but our ratings are so different, because I wrote down very, very weak disagree. Mm-hmm. And my logic was, again, like you said, I think there should be a huge social stigma on people who do that. I don't think they should reproduce, but I also don't trust the government to do it.
Yeah. I'll say that my reasoning for strong disagreement is, I strongly distrust any government that feels like it has the authority to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So the next one's, oh man, oh no, I skipped one. Okay. I was going to say I'm going to get myself in trouble on this question, but that's the next one. This one's a little weird to me. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. And those last two words were what kind of hung me up on it. Because what exactly do you mean by accept discipline? Because I kind of was thinking, ultimately I said, I disagree. I think it's important, but not the most important thing kids need to learn. And my biggest thing was the phrase of quote unquote accept discipline versus, does that mean like just tolerate it or make your peace with it? Because discipline's a fact of life. You're going to encounter people disciplining you. It's going to happen. You have to learn how to deal with it. You have to learn when to tell whether or not it's justified discipline. So I don't know what they mean by accept, but that's kind of what pushed me towards more, I disagree that it's the most important thing to learn. But I also do think you have to make some level of kind of coming to terms with the fact that, you exist in a hierarchy.
Yeah. We live in a society.
Yeah, we live in a society, exactly.
Yeah. So I'll strongly disagree on this, because I think you're really missing a very important part of the whole equation of child rearing if you think that's the most important thing. And in terms of discipline, I think it's a lot more important for a person to be internally disciplined, to be a disciplined person instead of just accepting discipline externally. Like, you ideally you should know what it is that you need to do, and hopefully you have a strong enough character that you're willing to go out and do it.
Yeah.
If we're focusing on external motivations, we're missing that. So yeah, I'll stick with strongly disagree. But I mean, yeah, it is important to understand that we live in a society.
Yeah, I mean, you just gotta, like I said, you don't have to like it. You just gotta have to come to terms with it to some degree. Otherwise, you turn into like, one of those Antifa kids who think the revolution is just one more broken Starbucks window away.
Yeah. Oh no, I think we lost Antifa as an audience.
Oh, I'm sorry, Antifa. I'm sorry.
Poor Antifa. They're
pastel
just...
colors were a mistake, Antifa. Go back to black. I still love that picture of the people that won Berkeley pro free speech rally. Where like the pastel blue, pastel yellow, pastel pink Antifa shields. It's the silliest thing I've ever seen.
Good job, Antifa. I wish you luck on your quest to fight fascism by punching people who disagree with you.
I wish you luck in your quest to enable the rise of fascism, just like you did in the 30s.
Oh God. Okay. There are no savage and civilized peoples. There are only different cultures.
All right, this is the first one in a while where I'm going full on extremist. I've been like weak, agree, disagree for like the last 10 or 11. Strongly disagree. Postmodernist, relativist bullshit. Cultures are not created equal.
Yeah, like you don't even need to compare like two different cultures in the same time period to like think about what your culture is, and think about what it was like in an earlier stage of development, and compare those two cultures. Like, would you say the one you're in is more civilized to some extent? Like
currently?
Well,
yeah.
Like what about the American Civil War? Like, you have two cultures. One of them is without slavery. Well, wage slavery might be another thing, but whatever. But yeah, you have a culture with chattel slavery in the South, and I think it's okay to make the statement that yeah, that's a less civilized culture.
I agree with you, but I feel the need to play devil's advocate and point out that for the vast majority of those so-called enlightened Northerners, the freeing of African Americans was incidental, and if they could figure out a way to end the war without having to do it, they probably would have.
Sure.
They ended the war because slavery was the one issue the South kept going into an autistic tantrum over, and they finally started a civil war. That's why the Emancipation Proclamation happened, and that's why Lincoln pushed through the 13th Amendment so hard before he would end the war. But it's also like, we can look at comparing historical cultures, but you look at like now, okay, is American culture perfect? God no.
Is it better than the Mongolian Empire?
I'm not even going to go historical. So I consider us better because we don't wrap our women up in bed sheets. We don't throw gay people off rooftops. We don't hate dogs.
Just careful with all this Islamophobia, dude.
Actually, hate dogs is more dig at Eastern Asians, but
well, I mean, it is a part of Islam too.
It is.
It's in the text that the prophet did not like dogs, and like black dogs especially, but cats were okay.
Yep. I'm convinced the cat thing was added in to not freak out the Egyptians, by the way. Like 100% convinced. Cats were okay because if we made cats haram, Egypt would never convert. But no, I mean, this is like my, I don't know if I'm going to call it like my version of racism, but I am a cultural supremacist. I think there are better cultures, and that's kind of, we talked about it when we were briefly talking about the inherent differences between races, but this is where I think the difference manifests. It's in cultural values.
Mm-hmm. Like, I don't, like, I feel like I agree with you in a lot of ways. Like, I just, I have misgivings about identifying myself as a cultural supremacist. Sure. I feel like that would probably get the wrong idea across, that I'm not willing to consider the value that can come from other cultures that are radically different. But I do think it's important to point out, like, there are key elements that you need in a culture in order to make sure that it's amenable to development. Like, if you have as an element of your culture, you can't question any part of the culture, then it's going to stagnate.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
Yeah, or when you just have straight up recidivist kind of attitudes in the culture that encourage people to just, it's not equipping them for existing in the modern world. in a lot of ways, I view culture as kind of like a template kind of guide society hands a person to succeed in the world, right?
Mhm.
But anyway, enough about all that.
Okay.
So this one's interesting. Speaking of the Green New Deal,
Yeah, really.
those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's reports. So, what's your take on the NEET question?
Oh. Well, I mean, in terms of NEET specifically, like I think instead of like shaming them or making sure that just making things more and more difficult, like I think some sort of outreach might be more helpful in some circumstances. Like some sort of community or social connection might make things better than like it would especially be more helpful than just like giving people in these circumstances more money.
Mm-hmm.
Like explicitly laying out a path in front of people that like, hey, this is what you can do from where you're at right now to make things better for you, make things better for the people around you. Like I think that's a better thing to focus on than the material things.
This is something that comes into my mind a lot when I think about universal basic income propositions. Is I think people are discounting the mental health effects being cooped up alone, able to entertain yourself endlessly with the internet, have on your brain. So my attitude is, I strongly agree that people who don't work shouldn't expect society's report. I was pretty hardcore on this one, and the attitude is just because it's not good for you. It sucks for society because you have literal leeches, right? People who don't contribute anything but are taking taxpayer money. That's a bad thing. It also just is not good for the person who isn't working. You need a purpose. You need something you have to do. You need interaction with people, some kind of local community. I mean, I think unless you go through a sustained period of isolation or unemployment, I think people don't really realize how important it is to have, I got to go into the office. I don't like it, but hey, I get to talk to Cheryl, or, I get to have to interact with, Bob, and Bob's kind of an ass, but it makes me be, forces me to practice having a poker face around people I don't like all that much, and it forces me to be a mature, member of the team and do my. It's bad for both parties to just be like, oh, you don't like people and you don't want to work. Okay, well, have some money, get out of our face. That's just bad for everyone involved.
Yeah, like there was some sort of study on masculinity or whatever by some funded by some competing razor company like Harry's whatever.
Of course.
Yeah, because this
razor companies are driving our academic study of masculinity now. This is where we're at. This is 2019.
Yeah. It said there was something in there about how something that men find a lot of value in is, finding work that they feel is productive.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, that's a big part of the whole social equation that we need to be paying attention to. Like things like, I think especially for men, like it's a lot better for our mental well-being if we have the opportunity to, take on some responsibility and do some real work that makes a difference. So we can be self-sufficient, provide for a family, whatever. Like I'm not saying that everyone's like this or that you're not a man if you're not like that or that there aren't any women who are like this in any way, but like this is
in aggregate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say, speaking from personal experience, last year I was unemployed for a stretch of time and it was not good for my mental health.
Oh yeah.
It's not great. I'm I'm happy to be out of it.
The first 3 months after I got laid off, I was busy the first like 6 weeks planning a move, and I moved up here, and I knew I had guaranteed money until at least the end of July, and I hated myself for 6 weeks and gained 20 pounds.
Yeah.
It's not healthy. It's a
Yeah.
bad way to live.
Okay. Oh, so we brought up the Green New Deal earlier. What was that in the
Oh,
Green New Deal? Something about those who were not willing to work.
yeah. So for those not in the know, last week, the infamous new Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, published, I guess, what she claims now is a draft of the Green New Deal. This is after, I'm going to point this out, this is after every single Democrat frontrunner for the presidential election in 2020 endorsed it. And it had a phrase, and it had amongst a bunch of other really stupid ideas, like retrofitting the entire existing American car industry to be hybrid, or rebuilding every city or every building in the country to be more green in the next 10 years, both of which are ludicrous propositions that literally will never be possible to achieve. It had a clause where it said basically that assistance or subsidies or some sort of like income should be provided to those who were unable or unwilling to work. And naturally, everyone kind of latched on to the second half of that statement pretty hard.
Wasn't there some weird stuff about like banning airline travel and having monorails everywhere?
I think that one was more misunderstood than really true. The meme is that she wanted to ban air travel. What she was more getting at, the way the text was phrased, was they'd build so much high-speed rail that air travel would be massively reduced. So it's not a ban. It's just a significant reduction of domestic air travel.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one I thought was kind of one of the... There's so much better stuff to latch on to make fun of this proposed Green New Deal than that particular line. I was a little disappointed with some people, like Ben Shapiro, for latching onto it.
Yeah. Like,
what's the next question?
Oh, I just want to comment on the question a little bit more. Like, the reason I didn't put strongly agree, I just put agree. Like, I don't think this statement is delineated very well. Like, those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity, like, technically that includes like retirees who are still physically capable. And how are we defining society's support? Like, does that include like roads, police, medical stuff that you can pay for? Like,
true, I did kind of latch onto it as being like a universal basic income or some kind of like financial support, but there's a lot of other stuff that could entail.
Yeah, like,
a lot of these are frustratingly vague.
Yeah, I mean, even if someone's not doing anything, they're still human. So like, you don't have to stick your neck out to help them out, but like at the very least, don't throw them into a camp or something.
Sure. No, I'm not saying round up the neats and have a neat Holocaust.
I think some of them would like it, actually.
The neat Holocaust. The memes would be legendary and short.
Yeah, if we did away with all the neats, there'd be some memes that I would really miss.
Oh yeah, we wouldn't get This is incredibly off topic, and I apologize in advance, but I have been absolutely loving the now that they remade Resident Evil 2, the Resident Evil 2 meme about Chris Redfield constantly demanding Leon impregnate his sister. You have to continue the family lineage, Leon. Get over here. Those have been pretty funny.
That's
I don't know if you played that game, but he's like weirdly fixated on setting up his sister with the main character, and it's kind of weird. It's funny.
That's okay. Anyway,
we're way off topic. Let's get back to what we're supposed to be talking about.
Moving on. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. This is basically, to me, read something like, do you take the red pill or the blue pill?
I got a bit of that out of it. I rated it agree, ultimately. but kind of like half-ish. I think when it's really distressing you in the moment, that's a good way to preserve your mental health, but you have to reapproach it later. So I kind of agree with the caveat that you have to address it down the line, but it's okay to distract yourself in the short term.
Yeah, I'm gonna say disagree.
Yeah.
Like I think people are I think people could stand a little bit more in order to tackle like big picture stuff. And there is something to thinking about what's going on in the present moment and thinking about your well-being, but I'm more afraid of not dealing with stuff that we're ignoring than I am of just one person in the world going crazy, even if that person is me.
Yeah, okay. I see your point. I think we have kind of the same idea. It's just a difference of timetable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, hey, yeah, these are kind of vague questions, so.
So the next one says, first-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within the new country. I have never rated a question in this entire test strongly disagree quicker. Some of the first-generation immigrants I've met are more American than natives.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of natives just take for granted what America has to offer.
Yes.
And a lot of immigrants are just like, oh my God, this place is amazing. I better not take it for granted. Better make sure the stuff that keeps it together is maintained.
I mentioned it earlier, but one of the accounts in the vague kind of ANCAP Twitter sphere that I've been, listening to, is the most Texan dude I've ever met, and he's an Afrikaner. He's an Afrikaner immigrant to Houston, and he is the most Texan person I have ever met. Really, I think one of the more worrying things in my mind when it comes to immigration is that often it's the second generation ones who have such a complex about being the children of immigrants and have like this weird kind of like, unproductive relationship with American culture.
Mm-hmm.
I see that a lot more than I see, first generation immigrants not integrating.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think we're on the same page with a lot of the stuff, but personally, I'm going to put disagree instead of strongly disagree, just because, like, fully integrated, like that's like that can include like a lot of minor, like I guess a few non-issues, but like there are some things that are that can be relevant in certain cases that pretty much might never go away depending on how you define them. Like in terms of like the accent, it's really hard to get rid of an accent if you're not like if you do like if you start learning a language after puberty, like you're probably not going to speak it perfectly fluently. And I think with that in mind, I can't make like a strong definitive statement about full complete integration. But depending on the situation, like yeah, the statement about how it can never happen, like I don't know. I'll just say disagree and leave it at that. But I'm gonna say full integration. It's not necessarily the most important thing to be fully integrated. A little bit of friction can be good.
I guess you and I just have different ideas of what fully integrated means. Because for me, I think America is like the easiest country to integrate on the planet. For me, accent that can be frustrating, but that's just look, there are people in fucking Boston I can't fucking understand. For me, it's like if you just have the spirit, if you have the values, if you have the attitude, I'm on board. And I've met, like I said, an Afrikaner refugee from South Africa. I've met an ex-KGB Russian programmer who was also a music producer, who's one of the most American dudes I've ever met. Like, I think it's really just a mindset, and I think that's one of the things that is great about this country is the fact that integration doesn't require, in my mind, taking on all these little cultural tidbits and and learning to speak fluent or perfect English, American English, quote unquote perfect American
Yeah.
English, which is all one unintelligible slur anyway.
Yeah,
It's
by no means
just
am I
gotta
saying
be,
that stuff's necessary.
yeah, you just gotta be an American. If you can make America jokes, you're an American.
Yeah.
If you can make good America jokes, you're an American.
And I don't think we need to limit this question to just America. Like there are some countries that are like I don't think I have any hope of successfully integrating in a healthy way with North Korea.
You don't even have to pull out North Korea. I lived there for 6 months, and I could never be a Swede. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah. So like, yeah, there are cases where it's like, yeah, you can honestly answer strongly agree based on like whatever countries are available or relevant.
Well, I think that's part of why Europe in particular is having such a problem with the whole refugee crisis is, France, Germany, these places are very tolerant on like the surface level, but it is so hard to integrate with a Western European country. It is so difficult. Americans have a hard time doing it. Imagine if you're a Pakistani and you move into, Germany, or imagine if you're from Algeria and move into France. Like these ghettos, I mean, they're not great, but they came about because it was so impossible for locals to really talk to the immigrants,
Yeah,
I think Europe has
it's
their
not
own problem.
great when you can't talk to people.
That's why, I mean, American countries, not just the United States, Mexico does this, the Caribbean does this, Brazil does this, South America does this in spades. The best thing about American countries is a lot of them figured out a way to have a national identity that wasn't inherently tied to ethnicity.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them so powerful. That's my take anyway.
Okay.
What is the next question?
What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us.
Yeah, no. Strongly disagree.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page here. Always ultimately good for all of us. That's quite a strong statement for something that's like Jesus.
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes when I took the test because I took the test this morning and kind of wrote my thoughts as I answered each question. And I wrote down subprime lending was good for the most successful corporations. Obamacare was good for the most successful corporations. These are entities isolated from all the consequences of their actions and have little to nothing to do with the betterment of your average citizen.
Yeah, this is like who is gonna put agree? That's what I'm wondering.
The most ANCAP of ANCAPs. Well, no, because the most ones are like, corporations inherently are oppressive because that's the government protecting a company from its own consequences. So I don't know. Nestle's CEO. That's who would vote strongly agree.
Yeah, I think you.
The head of Wells Fargo.
I think if you agree with this, you're probably disconnect. Like this is going to sound very judgmental, and I guess it is. But I think if you agree to this, you probably have some major disconnect with any sort of reasonable set of ethics.
Mark Zuckerberg would strongly agree. Click to dislike. Wasn't strongly agree.
Wasn't YouTube talking about getting rid of dislikes?
Yeah, because surprisingly not because of the rewind video. They were talking about getting rid of dislikes because what was it? It was like some YouTube. It was such a minor thing. It was some like YouTube update video that they have on like the YouTube channel that no one ever watches, and it had like 40K dislikes to 10K likes, and YouTube started squawking about getting rid of dislikes. I'm like, wait, that made you do it, but rewind didn't.
Maybe rewind is the real reason, and that update was like the official reason.
I guess I just found it hilarious because like I think it didn't even have 500K views. It was like the most unwatched video.
Yeah, when your institution is getting rid of the opportunity for people to give negative feedback, that's bad.
Yeah, as well, they've already made the tools for people to do that. Now it's just like YouTube itself wants to get rid of it.
Okay.
All right. So, next question is no broadcasting institution, or next statement, this isn't a question. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding.
I feel like I'm kind of on the fence about this one.
Yeah, me too.
I'll say disagree. Like, it's one of those things you should watch carefully. Like, it can so easily turn into a propaganda outlet
Yep.
that you're just required to pay for, depending on what sort of country we're dealing with.
Something I find interesting is there are countries that exist that have examples of the propaganda outlet. I think the CBC in Canada definitely comes close. I think BBC has those elements in it in the United Kingdom. But I also kind of look at how it's working in the United States, where NPR and PBS are probably one of the most anti-government media platforms we have, and they're publicly funded.
I think I'm fine with funding PBS.
Yeah,
they're pretty harmless, I think.
Well, it's not even a question of harm. I don't see this is one thing I like about our current government is we have publicly funded media that really isn't propagandistic at all, and often has very, very critical takes on the government. I mean, like I said, NPR is 3 ticks rightward of Democracy Now.
Yeah,
it's pretty anti-establishment. So I see the concern, but I don't think it's an ultimatum that it's always a bad idea.
And I also think it's important to keep in mind that there are cases where something can be done that's like quite obviously for the public good that your average person is not going to bother paying for, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, things that are related to public education can be something like that. Like if the only incentive is profit, then, there might be a chance we're missing out on some important things.
Sure. Yeah. I agree.
Okay. All right. So yeah, disagree. Next page.
Yep.
Oh, this is one.
This one's retro.
I'll let you read it.
Oh, you want me to read it? Okay. Dang, I wanted to read the next one because that one has like kind of a rules lawyer interpretation, but I'll go for this one. So
you can read both of them, and I'll read the next 3 or whatever.
Got it. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. So I don't think this is going to surprise anyone, but strongly agree.
Yeah, strongly agree. Like, I don't know that there's very much being done right now to curb more civil liberties. I feel like they've already been curbed.
Fundamentally.
Yeah. And I think it's just kind of stayed there now. Like that's the thing about freedoms being taken away. It's like once they're gone,
they don't come back.
It's a lot harder to reclaim it than it would have been to just try to agitate proactively.
Easily, as president, Obama not taking any action to roll back the whole surveillance state was my single biggest disappointment with his presidency.
Yeah.
Especially since that's something he didn't necessarily really need Congress's opinion on because it was all actions by the executive branch.
Yeah.
So it was in his wheelhouse and he still didn't do it.
For all the hope and change stuff, like, I don't think he did as much as I expected to distinguish himself from the neocons.
I'm out of hope, and the change was not the change I requested.
Yeah.
Anyways.
And so are there any civil liberties that are currently being curbed?
I mean, we're already all mass surveilled. We already have to deal with security theater every time we get on an airplane. I mean, asset forfeiture is still a huge thing. The drug war is still running rampant, despite some states trying to curb it down. No one seems to want to take action on getting rid of asset forfeiture, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's so bizarre. Oh, why don't we talk about that a little bit in a bit?
Yeah, we can talk about that for a moment to kind of pause the foreign policy questions. So for those who don't know, asset forfeiture is I haven't really prepped all that much on it, but it was a relic of the drug war. that basically allows the police to confiscate your cash, your possessions, if they have the belief that it's involved in drug trafficking. That was the idea too, because drug sellers, mostly operate on a cash basis. We're going to take all their cash. So now anyone we bust, we're going to take all their cash, say we think it's related to drugs. Many jurisdictions do not have it required to give it back, even if the person is proved not guilty.
Yeah.
It has a lot of problems. It's become a significant source of how police departments fund themselves, which has resulted in all the perverse incentives you can imagine it would. It's not good.
Yeah. I'd like to feel safe about, like, I'd like for people to feel safe about carrying sums of cash in their car.
Yeah.
Well, you shouldn't.
It's
You
not
shouldn't
limited
have
to
to.
your car either. I mean, they find cash in your house and they do something to bust you, they can take the cash. Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe the justification is literally anything associated with quote unquote drug trafficking. So if
Yeah.
you get busted on the side for carrying a dime bag, all your cash is gone. Have fun.
So, yeah, the what was it? The Fourth Amendment is something that Dan Carlin talks a lot about that
Yes.
most people don't. Yeah.
The most shredded amendment in our in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah. It's a travesty, man.
For those who don't know, because I understand, it's my understanding we don't teach civics in high school anymore. Fourth Amendment is an amendment that says citizens should not be subject to illegal searches and seizures. And asset forfeiture, by most, in the opinion of most legal minds, crosses the whole illegal seizure line.
Yeah.
Anyway. Should we go on to the next compass question?
Yeah. I guess I'll just say one more thing in terms of civil liberties being excessively curbed. Like these days, I'm less worried about the government doing that than about just private citizens doing weird stuff and not being aware that it's trampling on people's liberties.
I am profoundly disturbed how many people seem to think the Bill of Rights is suddenly not really all that worthy of a document once you scratch out government and write in corporation.
Yeah, what the hell?
That bothers me. That's very, very Brave New World. But I don't really have much more to say on it. I just think it's a travesty. All right. So this one's kind of interesting because there's a rules lawyer interpretation of this statement that you could use to kind of flip the opinion a bit. But the quote is, a significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. Now, I don't know about you. I voted strongly disagree on that one.
Yeah, I'm going to vote the same.
The rules lawyer interpretation I was talking about is whether or not that is an advantage, even if there are more disadvantages across it. And I feel like it's not even an advantage because I point you to the current state of both the major parties in the United States to say one party does not prevent intra-party factionalism and warfare.
Yeah.
We have two major political parties that are basically in a cold civil war right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think the whole one-party state that China has going on is... I don't think that's better than the two-party system that we have here.
No, it is not.
Yeah. Like, I know... Yeah, I've met some pretty patriotic Chinese people, but I'm sorry for the opinions that I have, guys, but I think the reason that you feel that the one-party state is okay is because you're not getting a lot of civics education that's not just state propaganda.
Or, could just chalk it up to you haven't lived under anything else.
Yeah, that's part of it. And, China's not the worst place in the world. The whole social credit thing is kind of messed up, but
Just kind of.
Like, yeah, but it's not North Korea. Like you can have a reasonable life there.
I guess. I find it kind of, it seems to me like it's oppressive in a very similar way. There are still people who are more or less disappear if they piss off the party, but
Yeah, all you got
they're
to
better
do
at
is
hiding the
not care about
totalitarian
politics.
nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a country that has literal re-education camps for Uyghurs,
Yeah, that's really messed up stuff. Like,
who basically tried to, going back a little bit to the Neanderthal comment, are basically trying to breed out Tibetans and replace them with Han Chinese. I mean, I don't know.
yeah.
They're not the worst, but that's a pretty low bar to cross.
Okay. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried.
I'm pretty sure you and I both strongly disagree on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Strongly disagree. Like, you need to understand that, if you let things get out of hand too much, a government can just decide, like, oh, this pretty innocent thing, that's what we're going to make that a serious crime, and now whoever is convenient to make a criminal, we'll make him a criminal.
I'm not even necessarily concerned about it from the criminalization manner, but more like, okay, we have a state that's currently in the middle of a huge political scandal kicked off by a yearbook photo from the 80s, an attorney general saying something, I don't know why he volunteered that he was once in blackface. I'm sure it made sense at the time. Yeah, no. Like the governor, okay, there's the photo. You have to make a statement. But then the attorney general just out and says, yeah, I was in blackface once. You're like, what are you saying?
Like,
imagine running for political office now that all the 80s yearbook shit is digitized and documented and archived.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, like at some point we need to have a certain amount of tolerance for, like, yeah, I think you brought this up earlier, like there needs to be like a path back to normal stuff. Like there needs to be forgiveness in your system. Like there needs to be some way to participate as a citizen, even if you did something silly when you were a kid. That's pretty reasonable. Like, I think it was Sam Harris or something that he mentioned something on a podcast about, like, like we reintegrate murderers back into our society, but a lot of people don't seem willing to reintegrate people who said a naughty word.
We're getting ahead of ourselves talking about rehabilitation.
Okay.
Let's table this discussion till a couple questions later.
All right. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes.
So this is one where, like, independent of context, I agree with the statement. I think there are crimes for which death is the most fitting punishment. However, I rated it disagree because I utterly lack faith in the government's ability to do so in a 100% accurate, unerring fashion.
Yeah.
And sentencing someone to death for a crime they did not commit is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, that's really messed up. I'm gonna say disagree too, but I'll say, like, this can come down to a question of scarcity and, like, how well maintained your justice system is. Like, if your country is not really funded, or it doesn't very well, and it doesn't have a government that's set up with a lot that's on the books, like it might start to make sense that, like, okay, we need to get back to farming. We don't have the time to deal with a lot of legal stuff. It's gonna be a lot more effective for that society to just decide, like, okay, the guy that's been killing a bunch of people, let's just kill that guy, get on with our lives.
So what you're saying is it works in a pre-modern era?
Sure.
In a developing world? I guess. I mean, I'd take that as a hallmark that you should develop the society to not be at that point. But I get
absolutely.
What you're saying.
There should be that motivation. Like, ideally, You should try to, like, I think ideally, if you have unlimited resources, you should try to give everybody the best of life that's available.
Hmm.
But when you factor scarcity and real life nonsense into the equation, like, yeah. But I will say, in terms of just American stuff, like, it's gonna cost more money to have someone receive the death penalty when all the legal fees are accounted for than it is to just like provide for them. And at that point, it's like, why do we want this person to die so badly?
Yeah.
Like, maybe it should be an option for the person to decide, like, okay, like, I don't want to be a burden on anyone. I don't want this existence. I want an out. Someone hit my off switch. But um uh
You want to go to the next one?
yeah, in a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded.
So I found this one kind of weird.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I rated it disagree, but it's more like, I mean, I almost kind of reject the question's premise. I don't think it's a factor of civilized society. I just think hierarchies manifest. It's
Yeah.
how humans exist.
It's how lobsters exist.
It's not like one must. It's just like that's just how it is.
Yeah.
You're always going to have someone who's leading people. You're always going to have people who just follow. I mean, it's just kind of how. I don't know. It feels weird to make it sound like this must exist. It's like, yeah, it's reality. I mean, I think the genuine, like, anarcho-commune types who think we can have this society free of hierarchies and distinction, I think that's kind of like a joke.
Yeah.
It's built into how we function. It's just how we are.
I think maybe because of the phrasing of this, I'm putting strongly disagree.
Okay.
Like, the whole people above to be obeyed, people below to be commanded. It almost reads like that's the primary aspect of their being. Like, that's
Sure.
what society is all about. That's what you're here for. I'm here to command you. You're here to be commanded.
Yeah.
Like, that's really a messed up way of looking at the world, I think. Like, if when hierarchies, when they exist, they can exist in a healthy way, and I think we should pay attention to the reasons we have them. We have them there because they're productive. Like, it's more, we can generate more good things more efficiently if we're collectively able to figure out, like, hey, these people over here, they might have a better idea about how to run things. The company that they're running is making more money. Maybe we should try to figure out what they're doing and adopt that. And if we're incapable of imitating it, then sign on and follow their lead.
It's a function of human psychology to quickly disseminate information so endemic to how we think that every creative endeavor, all the software, all the technology we create, it manifests in that itself. If you look into software development, I mean, there's a reason people are throwing a fit over the widespread usage of the master and slave term within software development.
And what was that other stuff about, like, killing children?
What?
There was some other terminology. There's like a child, whatever.
Oh, killing child processes. Yeah. You create yeah. I'm not super into development, but basically the logic is you create a sub process to do something specific, and because it's related to the master process, it's called a child process, right? And when it's done, you kill it, because that's what you do. You kill things that are. Kill is a Unix term for ending a process. There's a joke. you can just kill the process number, and that's nicely telling it to go away. And the fuck off kind of command is kill -9. that's I don't want to hear your jabber, just die already. I'm no longer dedicating CPU cycles to you. All right, I liked this next one actually. This next question. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. I want you to guess my answer. I'm curious.
I guess I'll just. Maybe you're saying strongly no. Disagree.
Correct. I like a lot of abstract art. I like some Pollock. I like some of just the abstract shapes and colors, and they're all if done well, they can be very visually appealing. The modern art meme that I dislike is the random household objects repurposed to be quote unquote a commentary.
Yeah.
Or sculpture.
It's like
that's why I like SLR anymore.
Once it was interesting the first time someone did that.
Yeah.
After that, it's just being lazy.
I think someone described it pretty funnily. The infamous example of the household objects repurposed for modern art is the urinal that R. Mutt kind of submitted for this one art exhibit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Claimed it was a sculpture. And someone I remember when I was in college and a friend kind of was explaining the story of this sculpture, and he was like, it's a 19th century shitpost.
Yeah.
They said anyone who paid the fee could put up something. He's seeing what he can get away with. So I like that one a lot, but much like a lot of memes, it's run its course.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you can take off your glasses, put it on the floor, and stand back and look at it thoughtfully, and have people gather around you and look at the glasses on the floor, that there's something wrong with the art culture that you have.
Yes. What's the next question?
Oh, and I'll just say, strongly disagree. I like it. You can say that abstract art is inferior art, but it's kind of ridiculous to say it's not art. Like, I get really annoyed by people who get all snooty about, like, oh, this. If you learn, or the people who are just like really pretentious in terms of art theory and just decide like, if you're a true artist, you know that this interpretation of art is blah 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 blah. It requires these elements. It's like, dude, it's just things that people make that look cool. That's what it is.
My sister-in-law had a really great way of putting it, where she's like, because she studied art history in college, right?
Mm-hmm.
And her line was, art conversations are really boring with someone who knows nothing about art, really boring with someone who studied and majored in art history, and really interesting with someone who only minored in it.
Yeah, that sounds
if you don't
right.
get full on into the culture, it's a lot like, the discussion's a lot more interesting.
Yeah. I think that sort of culture develops because the people involved, like, they might be just a little bit insecure about how subjective their field is, and they want to grasp onto some sort of authority to be able to convince people that there's something deeper that you really need to study in order to be like the true la da 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 da.
It's classic credentialism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation.
So I rated disagree. I think one of the worst aspects of the American criminal justice system is the overwhelming focus on punishment.
Yeah. It's kind of messed up.
Yeah. It doesn't improve recidivism rates. In fact, if anything, the overfocus on punishment puts a lot of people who committed moderate crimes in extended contact with professional criminals, who then build networks to become professional criminals on their own, and then they leave prison and remain professional criminals. Rehabilitation is much more important if you want to if the goal is to lower overall the amount of crime in society and the amount of money we spend on the prison industry, rehab is more important than punishing.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like, yeah, I'll put disagree. And I think, I don't know if necessarily one is a lot more important than the other, ethically speaking, but I mean, I do think that rehabilitation should at least be considered, should be given equal consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there needs to be a plan for what's going to happen with these people after they get out. Like, or if if like there needs to be a path for redemption. Otherwise, like, what are we even doing?
Well, and honestly, I almost think it's a waste of good available labor for the way we just lock people up in jail for non-violent crimes. I
Yeah.
almost think a lot of crimes like that. I mean, non-violent crimes, you've infringed upon the social contract in some way. I almost think for the vast majority of it, barring some incredibly despicable things that didn't amount to killing people, a hardcore community service kind of thing, or use these people, have these people work off their debt to society from what they've done, versus just locking them up, having them stamp out license plates and meet a lot of Crips members who know all the hookups and the people and the contacts to live as a professional criminal, and give these people a whole avenue to basically go back and immediately go back into being a criminal again.
Yeah,
you got to give them a way out of that life.
Ideally, someone who's run afoul of the justice system can come to a point at some point in their life where they realize, like, wow, I did a really messed up thing, and like maybe on some level I deserve this punishment. Maybe going forward I'll atone for what I did, instead of like generating this resentment that they might have for the rest of society.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's me against the world. Like, I would like that idea to not manifest as often as it does.
So this will segue quite nicely into the next statement, which is, it is a waste of time to try and rehabilitate some criminals.
I think, okay, this is another thing where scarcity becomes relevant, and like how functional is the justice system that we're dealing with. Like, if you just don't have the resources for as many criminals as there are, then yeah, you're not going to be able to spend as much time and energy trying to rehabilitate everybody. They're like, if you come into that sort of situation and you still are able to scrape together enough to try to rehabilitate some people, you're going to want to prioritize the people who are most likely candidates. So
I also rated agree. Interestingly, I didn't think about scarcity resources. I spent too much time on the internet to know that there's real evil, and some people are just fucking evil.
That's true.
You're never going to rehabilitate Charles Manson.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that Timothy McVeigh was one of the few times where use of the death penalty was probably a good idea, because McVeigh was not going to be reformed and basically just used his infamy as, a terrorist to continue to soapbox his politics to the media. I mean, there are times where there are people who are irredeemable. Thankfully, there are very, very few of them.
Yeah, and yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Like, if we start demonizing like half of the country that we're a part of, like, the really, really evil people are just going to slip under the radar.
Yes.
And like, I'd like to have attention paid towards them instead of the guy who let something stupid slip at that one time 5 years ago.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, agree. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Okay, so I guess there's some different ways we can interpret this one. Like, are we talking about them as economic actors or, like, shoot, as people, as moral agents?
I kind of looked at it from a societal and cultural standpoint, which resulted in me kind of giving a very weak disagree. I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but a lot of like white collar work is basically busy work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to go out and say, and a lot of manufacturing work is just rote repetition because they haven't been able to figure out a way to automate it yet. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're more important because of that. Because, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think there's this. I think there are exceptional people within all four of these disciplines, but
Absolutely.
I don't think, as a whole, any of them are particularly essential. I do
Mhm.
think, and it's something that frustrates me. I do think there's a tendency among culture creators, if you want to use that term, the writer, the artist, the musician, the director. You know, there's a tendency for them to massively overstate how important they are.
Yeah. Like the people within an industry like giving awards to each other. That's kind of funny.
Well, I mean, that's not uncommon. That's not limited just to media. I mean, you know, the Oscars or the Grammys are basically just the media equivalent of, you know, the fish packer industry awards or the insurance sales agent company awards. You know, they're just it's just that's the thing industries do, and because we're so entertainment connected with that particular industry, we care about their award shows for some reason. Although I should rephrase that. They think we care. Recent ratings tell otherwise. But you know, it's just I think trying to decide which job is the most whether the economic or the creative or which is more important. It's like our brain. We have a left and a right half. They're both important. We both need both of them. Things get weird when you cut the cord between them. Just
Yeah.
trying to prioritize one or the other is just unnecessary in my opinion.
Yeah. I will say when it gets like to the basics, the bare bones, like uh it it's going to be more important that the supply lines are in place and that people are getting food and water than it is that someone gets to see a pretty picture. So I'm just going to put agree on this for, like, hey, we need to prioritize the stuff that keeps us alive.
I guess. The
I,
next one's a little bit of a interesting one.
oh boy.
So this is the how tradcon are you question. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be a homemaker or be homemakers. Sorry.
You go first.
Personally, for me, out of a partner, that's probably what I would actually want.
Mhm.
I don't think you should push that at a societal level. That's not liberty. You got to let people live their lives. But I would probably, I'd probably do the same thing my parents did, where it's like whoever makes more money when the first kid's born, that's the one who continues to be the breadwinner, and the other one works, is a parent.
That sounds
within your
fair.
means to make that financially viable.
Yeah, like ultimately you're gonna have like everyone has like some sort of unique circumstances that factor into whatever decision they make, and like it's not hard to imagine cases where it's like, yeah, it really does make more sense for for there to be a stay-at-home dad, or it really does make more sense for like heck, like there might be cases where the mother might have some duty that supersedes taking care of her kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like there might be she might have to go fly off into space and detonate some asteroid or something to save the planet. That's more important than staying at home or whatever.
Is the mother in this scenario Bruce Willis?
Sure. Yeah, however he identifies is none of my business. But I think just for the hell of it, I guess I'm kind of putting agree here
Hmm.
because a lot of my motivation for doing so is just a recognition of like where we're at in terms of where like what's happening in our culture and the things we're talking about. I don't think the the mainstream American feminism really has a very healthy relationship with uh,
Motherhood.
yeah, or
Yes.
just a lot of standard feminine psychology in general. Like, hey, we do need mothers to be mothers if we're going to survive to the next generation.
Well, sure, but what the statement is saying is not that mothers need to be mothers, but they have to be homemakers.
Oh yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean,
that's
if it
another
was
thing.
mothers need to be a parent, their first duty is to their kid, yeah, I'd strongly agree with that. But that's not what
Yeah,
it's saying.
I mean, I do think there also needs to be recognition that like generally there's more women have more of an attraction to men who can provide than men have an attraction to women who can provide.
Men
And
don't give a shit if women can provide.
yeah,
Let's not beat around the bush.
yeah. So I like it's kind of sad to hear all these stories about like the hyper successful career woman who like just spent her 20s just climbing the corporate ladder and then she decides to turn around and look for a partner and it's a lot more difficult than she expected because she didn't recognize that she wasn't looking for to achieve the same thing that like the thing that men want in a partner, it's generally not the same thing women want in a partner.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find a heterosexual man in the United States who would put earning potential even within the top five of
Yeah,
things he cares about in a partner.
yeah. I mean, for some men, it's like it's even a strike against. Like,
Oh yeah,
you can say that it's a little bit emasculating. I mean, I don't think I really have that complex. I'm I'm not that toxically masculine, but like I can that's something I can empathize with a little bit. Like if I feel like I'm not really pulling my weight,
hmm.
it's gonna feel weird.
Moving right along.
Okay.
Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. I mean, that one seemed kind of like a no duh, strongly agree to me.
Yeah. I mean, I this is an issue that I'm not super well informed on, so I don't feel like I can say strongly agree because I'm just going on like off of secondhand information and the sort of bad reputation that Monsanto has.
Yeah, Monsanto, Nestle.
Hmm.
This is not necessarily multinational companies, but all the incredibly shady shit that Chinese sponsored companies are doing in East Africa. It's a lot of exploitation going around in that
Yeah.
sense.
I'll just change my answer to strongly agree. You convinced me.
All right.
That was enough.
I mean, Nestle literally deliberately tried to convince African women it was a bad idea to actually breastfeed their kids so they could
Oh
get
god.
formula
Oh god.
sold. I mean,
Yeah,
come
I've
on.
heard about that one. But I mean, technically that's not exploiting plant genetic resources.
True. I was just thinking, and I wasn't quite sure what they. I mean, plant genetic resources like what the wildlife, the flora. I mean,
I mean, yeah, it's
yeah.
I
Any
mean, it's
any
oh
country that grows rubber or bananas is being exploited by multinationals. There you go.
I think it's okay uh to ex to do experiments with the genes of plants and animals.
Yeah.
Like I think that's fine. Like hell, even humans, if we're trying to get rid of like the hereditable diseases, like if you can uh, take care of something, uh, like take care of your genes, do something to manage that before you have kids. Like that'd be a pretty cool thing to do. I don't know the whole science that's behind all of it, but I wouldn't be
FYI,
opposed.
I just looked it up, and plant genetic resources is basically kind of a catch-all term for crops, essentially.
Mhm.
Yeah, so get rid of my Nestle example and go to United Fruit Company. That's my example.
Oh boy,
Why we have the
that's a-
term banana republics.
that's a whole thing.
Right.
Okay. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity.
So in my notes, I termed this question "Lick That Boot, Rebel."
Oh, speaking of licking boots, did you see that video?
What one?
I think this was the Black Hebrew Israelites again.
They do now.
They were yelling at people, and they were like commanding this white boy to lick his boot for equality, and the guy
That sounds
the
like something they yell.
the guy just shrugged and went ahead and did it. Knelt down and licked the man's boot for equality. Well, like I feel like it's inappropriate to throw the term "cuck" about all willy-nilly.
I can't imagine someone doing that seriously. Really, like he meant it.
Yeah. Well, this guy, it's like how many people in human history would have died before bending the knee, and this guy just does it.
Well, I mean,
in front of everyone.
It's also if there's no stakes involved. If it's just some meaningless thing, I mean, you could just be fucking with him. I don't know. I'd have to see the video. But in any case,
just embarrassing. Maybe I'm making too much of it.
I just find it funny.
It is.
I rated this one agree with like a little bit of a caveat, which is I don't think making peace is the same thing as accepting.
Yeah.
You got to accept that it exists. I accept that, I've made peace with the fact that I don't really like the federal government that much or the traction it's on. That doesn't mean I'm not going to stop trying to change that. It's just that's how it is. That's the situation as it exists.
Yeah, I'm also saying agree, and that's also how I'm interpreting it. Like if you're not at peace with the establishment and you can't accept what they're doing, well, then it's your responsibility to go out and make them change.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So the next page, this is where we get into the kooky religious stuff.
The woo, as Rogan would put it.
The woo and the moral majority. So statement one, probably the most laughable of anything I saw in this entire quiz is astrology accurately explains many things.
Strongly disagree.
Strongly disagree.
That's not hard.
I saw a really weird article a couple months ago where like someone was trying to push astrology as like the empowering feminist / queer thing to believe in, and that there was like some woman complaining about how all of her Tinder dates are toxic males who don't believe in her astrology. And then at least she has her gay bestie who also believes in astrology. I was like, dear God.
Oh God. Yeah, I have this. I have this friend of mine who he got into this relationship with this girl who was really into witchcraft and astrology, and my friend was like really he's an engineer. He's like super into sci-fi and like hard science stuff. And he was a tolerant guy. He's just like, yeah, it's you're just gonna be wrong, but I can deal with this. I'm not. He was. I don't think he was looking at her ability to provide, we might say.
Yeah.
But yeah, like after a while, they broke up because like I guess she just couldn't handle that difference of like his adherence to what empiricism.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up. I think she made a huge mistake.
Yeah. Some people just weren't meant to be together.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm gossiping too much here.
Yeah, it's all good.
But okay, so I guess I'll justify it by saying it illustrates something that's part of human nature. So if it accurately explains many things, you could okay. So a lot of how the superstitious stuff works is, the human brain tries to look patterns for things even when they're not really connected to anything, like causally related.
Yep.
You could you could make a statement that, okay, I'm gonna flip a coin. I'm gonna flip a coin 100 times, and every time I'm gonna predict it comes up heads. Maybe it comes up heads 50 times. Did I make 50 accurate predictions? Are those many accurate predictions technically?
Well, and I mean, part of how astrology in particular works in terms of like enabling the superstition is if you read a horoscope, they're incredibly vague.
Yeah.
I think they've done repeated psychological tests where they wrote a horoscope, gave it to everyone in the class, and that's what they thought applied to them. And pretty much everyone said, yeah.
And I think it is interesting to investigate, like, what are those things that most humans can identify with? Those are things that are important to investigate.
Turns out it's insecurity and a desire for good luck.
Yeah, and another thing, I am open to the idea that the time of year you were born might have some subtle impact on your personality, like how you develop in the womb. There's a lot of factors that can go into what kind of person you turn out to be. So maybe the ambient temperature, depending on the seasons, maybe that has some effect that people picked up on some subconscious level.
I think there's also just a cultural element. I mean, something interesting that always happens with me is, so I have a summer birthday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I find interesting is every time someone else says, "Hey, my birthday is also around that time," right? Or also blah blah blah, and I can always ask the question, "Yeah, did you in school were you always lumped in with the everyone else on the last day of school for the summer birthday celebration?" And they're almost always like, "Oh yeah, it was weird. I didn't like it." To a fault. Every time someone mentions they also have a summer birthday, if I ask that question, they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. It was not fun. I don't like it. I never got a day off from my birthday."
Yeah. So yeah, you can make a prediction based on the time a person was born, and that's
That has
an
nothing
accurate.
to do with astrology. So
Yeah. Yeah. And like technically, the relationship between the planets and the moon and the sun, like that does have a material effect on things. Like there's the tides, there's night and day, but that's the superstitious stuff that can go pound sand.
I mean, remember, our species for the most part evolved in an area near the equator where there weren't really seasons.
That's a thing to think about.
All right, next one. So this one's kind of a really simple one, and I don't think we're going to have a lot of stuff to say about it. You cannot be moral without being religious. Disagree?
Yeah, I'll say strongly disagree.
Yeah.
But I think there might be, like, I get the sense that you might be on the same page on some of the things I might be about to say, but I do think there might be something to investigating the spiritual aspect of your psyche, and I think there's something about there might be a reason why that part of human psychology is linked for so many people to morality. I think you can have a psychological experience that matches what a religious person would describe as a religious awakening or a spiritual moment, and you can do that, and you might be able to make use of it in order to confirm with yourself that, hey, operating ethically is a very important thing to do, and I should make sure that I should do it.
I kind of looked at this. I didn't really think about it from the whole religious experience standpoint, but I looked at it like, okay, you're talking about a template for morality. There are plenty of secular templates for morality that have
Sure.
nothing to do with religion. You study philosophy. I mean, you study history. You survey your local community. You tons of stuff to just to form a moral framework that has little to nothing to do with religion. It's useful. I think we're realizing as our society becomes increasingly secular that it actually was a very powerful cultural glue, if you will, to keep societies together. But I don't think it's the only way. I think you can be a-religious and be a perfectly moral person.
Do you think that society would be improved if the general public became significantly more secular?
No. The main reason being is that we are having a very hard time finding the community aspect of religion or a way to replace the community aspect of religion in a secular way. I don't think it's a stretch to say that compared to very, very devout religious people, a lot of secular people live a much more isolated life and often feel a lot more alienated from people around them than a religious person might be with their local community. So, I mean, I would say if we could find a way to replicate the societal benefits without inheriting the prejudice, the extremism, the
woo,
the bigotry, if we could find a way to bring back, I don't know, like Christianity Plus, which is, Christianity with mostly focused on good community efforts and forging community ties, then yeah, go more secular. But
I think it's hard to do that with sometimes without establishing some bizarre cult of personality.
absolutely.
Or become like starting to think about different things in an unhealthy way. Like I think there are some political activists that are, in terms of religion, they're like secular, but they treat their cause as though it's a religious, like it's their religion, and they use like they're not using the sort of empirical, it's more of an ideological thing or a tribal thing than it is like, how are we going to find the best way to move forward?
They've supplanted theology for ideology.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think that's part of what pushes the political divide, because if you assume the other side is still part of like your in-group, but disagrees with you, a conscientious objector, a noble opposition, compromise can be made, discussion can be had. But we're increasingly reaching a point where you're not part of the in-group having an alternative viewpoint. You're a heretic.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, I mean, really, there's a lot of societal losses, but I really think the secularization of the U.S. has hurt its politics so much in that sense, that people just supplanted politics for religion, and then everything became much more extreme and divided.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it might be an advantage that religious people have, that their religious thinking can, well, I guess it depends on the person and it depends on the faith, but a lot of times their belief is their way of treating things religiously. It's just confined to certain topics, and they're willing to be empirical about other things related to the material world. If you just limit your faith to questions of morality and the afterlife that might be better than if you're using that sort of thinking with certain other things.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's complicated.
I think it's a human adventure that is new and we haven't figured out how to get onto the other side of it yet, and we don't know what the other side of it looks like yet.
Yeah, this might be the great filter.
I hope not. All right. This one's a little weird. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. I kind of, yeah.
Do you feel strongly about this?
Not strongly.
I just have disagree.
Yeah, I kind of put it like I do think charities are better overall at fixing a situation than a government program to do it. Just because
certain charities, though, man.
Some charities are terrible. Yeah, no, but like in generally speaking, there's a lot of smaller ones, right?
Yeah.
I kind of, I don't mean that to say I think we should get rid of Social Security, because if you get rid of Social Security, old people will vote in Neo FDR into 4 consecutive terms again. So, we need both, and both have their own unique problems. And I kind of only mildly disagree that charity's better.
Yeah, I guess it really depends on what charity, what Social Security, and who's genuinely disadvantaged. Like,
yeah, what constitutes that?
Yeah. So it's a big scope here. I'm not going to feel very strongly about my answer.
Yep, same.
Okay, some people are naturally unlucky. Disagree?
Same. I think a lot of people who think of themselves as chronically unlucky just make retarded decisions repeatedly.
Yeah. But I mean, you could say that person was unlucky to be the sort of person that would do such a thing.
I guess, but that's getting really meta. I mean, it's like luck kind of almost by definition is random and capricious.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So saying someone is predisposed to have bad luck is like, no, it's random and capricious.
Yeah. I mean, like, I guess defining luck is kind of a difficult thing to do, but I will say I do think it is important to recognize that there are some things, bad things happen to us that are outside our control.
Sure.
And there's a limit. Like, I'm not going to fall into the whole just world fallacy on every issue. Sometimes things just suck and there's not a lot of things we can do about it.
Sometimes you have a really great football team, a really great football game. Sometimes you're the Rams and you made the mistake of playing against Bill Belichick and he completely ran your defense on you and you lose the Super Bowl, Sometimes it's, like I said, random and capricious.
Yeah. Though, personal responsibility, that's important too. Like, if the culture on the left goes to the point where it's unacceptable to talk about personal responsibility in any capacity, then something's going wrong.
Sure. All right. Next one, I think we're not going to have a lot to say. I don't imagine. This one's pretty basic. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. No. No, it is not.
Strongly disagree. It is very important that they do not do that.
I will say, though, I do think I would not be opposed to a school. I mean, the problem is I don't know if I trust any particular school district to not try and push an agenda with it. But
yeah, sure.
Just a general theology class and a discussion of religion could be educationally very useful. But
that would be really helpful.
Quote unquote, trying to use school to instill religious values? Nah.
Yeah, it'd be, it would be interesting to talk about, like, hey, what sort of philosophies can we see in these religious texts?
Yeah.
What do they say, and what is the commonly accepted interpretation, and along what lines are the believers
And how's it drive the cultures of those who subscribe to that religion or created that religion?
Yeah, it really does not pay to be naive about this sort of thing.
No.
Yeah, like if like what's an example of a religion that nobody likes?
Scientology.
Sure, Scientology. Like
That was quick. Sorry.
Well, that's fine. Like, yeah, I'll agree that I don't think Scientology is very great, and I don't think that uh, I don't think that the general public is best served if everybody is treating it exactly the same as something that's more benign.
Oh, I've thought for a while it's ludicrous that they have tax exempt status, but
Yeah.
this is what happens when you have an entire religion made by lawyers.
That's a recipe for success.
Yeah.
Okay. Next page.
In the final stretch, this one should be pretty quick too.
Talk about sex.
Yes.
Okay, sex outside marriage is usually immoral.
Yeah, no, disagree.
Yeah, I'll put disagree.
I think sexual compatibility is pretty damn important for forming long-term relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, people can way overdo it. And I would actually even entertain arguments that our current society way overdoes it. But I don't think the return, it's better to go back to like the 50s where everyone's getting married at 19 so they can finally have sex.
Yeah.
It's not a better model.
Like I think if you're going to have like I think for most people, it's, when it comes to sex, there's exceptions everywhere.
Sure.
But I think for a regular person, you're probably better off in your dating life if you take sex as something of a serious thing. Like you probably shouldn't do it if you're not serious about trying to make something work with the other person.
Yeah, like I'm not really a fan of hookup culture, but
yeah, like
yeah,
that's
I also don't think that doesn't mean it should be like outlawed or anything. It's just not really something
sure.
I think is good.
Yeah, people.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, a same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption.
So, on that one, I put strongly agree.
Me too.
I'm aware of the stereotypes. I knew a girl in high school who was raised by two lesbian parents, and they were very stereotypical lesbian parents, and she had a lot of hangups because of it. But my attitude is, yeah, there are going to be pairings that like have issues, and in her particular case, instilled a terrifying fear of men into their daughter.
Oh
but,
boy.
It's not like hetero couples are 100% not going to fuck up kids too. So
yeah,
I kind of take it with like kids need a family, and if a same-sex couple is willing to provide a home, it's better for the kid to have a family than to just keep churning through the foster system.
Absolutely. Not having parents is like having a parent, ideally having both parents. That's even if they're crappy, it's a lot better for the development of a child
in most cases.
Into a healthy adult. Like, oh yeah, there are some monsters out there, and like, yeah, get the kids away from monsters for sure. But yeah,
yep.
Strongly agree. Like I guess hypothetically you might be able to figure out like some metric where a same-sex couple is less capable of generating certain positive outcomes in a child they're rearing, but I don't think that that's going to be such an issue that they need to be excluded from any possibility. That's just too extreme.
The kinds of studies they found finding differences between same-sex parents and heterosexual parents, you could probably also find between same-sex parents and interracial couples, or same-sex parents and religious and non-religious parent. You know, it's like at the end of the day, for the vast majority of cases, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, like not everybody can have the same parents.
The goal with adoption is to try and get people to have families and not necessarily to make sure they have the best family, just to
Yeah.
have families, because this alternative sucks.
Yeah. Okay. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population.
Now, I'll admit I'm not super educated on where porn laws are at in the U.S. right now, but I've said strongly agree. I think we're in a good
strongly
place. Just
agree.
make it legal. I really, whatever.
Like I think, there's something to be said that certain this might
I'll
be an
entertain
industry
arguments
that
addiction can be bad, but
yeah,
it's not
and
sufficient reason to make it illegal.
yeah, like people are gonna have access to it at some point. Where there's a will, there's a way, and for something like this, there certainly is a will.
We have porn on our phones now.
Yeah,
it's never been more of a way.
yeah. The cat is out of the bag.
You can't
So
you can't put that genie back into its bottle.
that conjures an image. Okay.
All right. In the same vein, what goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. I said strongly agree.
The state is not going to come between me and my nuclear reactor fetish.
I don't even want to know.
No, yeah.
Sounds like
agree.
It burns.
I'm just saying that there should be some kind of I think it kind of goes without saying here that you shouldn't do weird stuff to animals.
Well, the term there was consenting adults.
Yeah. So
animals can't consent.
Or I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway,
there's probably some conceivable stuff that would violate my sense of ethics, but
some deranged weirdo will find a loophole.
Yeah. So, but for now, I'll say strongly agree.
I look forward, by the way, to the inevitable controversy that will arise once sex bots are a thing and this conversation topic comes up.
Oh boy.
That's gonna be It's already entertaining every time the topic comes up.
There's already this controversy that crops up with the whole idea of the sex doll brothels.
Yep.
Like a lot of feminists are really upset about it.
Well, they get mad it's really quite funny how hypocritical the feminist outrage over sex bots and male tools for sexual pleasure kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, it's like I kind of feel like if you have so little to offer in a relationship
that a robot can replace you.
Yeah. And if you really can't compete with that, maybe you need to work on yourself a little bit.
Yep.
Okay. No one can feel naturally homosexual.
Yeah, that was a strongly disagree for me.
Yeah, I mean I was talking with a coworker about this. He was saying it wasn't natural, and I'm like, dude, there's animals do this stuff. This is like, regardless of your feelings about how ethical it is, it's pretty clear that it's a natural thing.
Yeah. Well, and so my best friend in college is gay, and that man could not be straight if he tried. It's not possible.
Yeah. This sort of thing happens.
Probably the one person where when he finally came out, absolutely no one was surprised. So.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you might be able to make a case that there are some edge cases where the culture your local subculture gets so bizarre that you really have a hard time separating what you're encouraged to be doing from your own sexual instinct. And that might get to a point where it's like you feel homosexual where you're not really. But these would be some very fringe cases, and I don't expect them to be relevant for most situations.
Are you suggesting it's a bad idea to raise a child in Castro? Oh,
What?
sorry, San Francisco neighborhood, the gay
Oh,
neighborhood in San
oh,
Francisco.
yeah. Maybe that's not a great thing to be doing.
All right, and the last statement, which I had kind of an interesting thought about, is these days openness about sex has gone too far, and I have kind of a conditional agree on that one.
Yeah.
I think as adults, whatever. I mean, yeah, I do think maybe it's a little over sexualized, but it really doesn't bother me that much. But I do think we are pushing sexual politics, sexual issues, gender issues, that kind of stuff on children way too much.
Yeah.
I don't get why it's now a thing for drag queens to read books to kids in elementary schools. I find
That's
that
pretty
profoundly
far.
bizarre.
And that whole issue with the drag kids, like Desmond, making the
Desmond,
rounds.
I,
That's
I
messed
don't want
up.
to go all pull and throw out the phrase degenerate, but every time I see a story about Desmond, I'm just like, this is degenerate. This is pathetic. This is just, these parents are responsible. That kid is being abused, essentially.
Yeah, and if our culture can't recognize that that's a bad thing that's happening to this kid, like I don't to the extent that we can't recognize it, I
Yeah.
think the culture is unhealthy.
I think people are kind of still locked about fighting against the moral majority types, and the pendulum's gone way too far in the other direction.
I would absolutely agree with that assessment. And I think this is another case of a situation where, hey, this is a statement, a position that your position can change, even your answer can change, even if your position has stayed consistent.
Yeah.
Like, if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would say disagree. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe a weak disagree. Yeah. But this is clear. It's clearly gone too far.
We've overcompensated, you guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Do you feel like this represents you to within reasonable margins in terms of your political perspective?
In terms of like my practical politics, yeah, for the most part. What did you get for your results on the right left scale?
Okay, I'm gonna click the button. So we're doing a little drum roll. Okay. All right. So
let's just start with the economic before we get into social.
Okay.
So I got negative 1.5. So center left economic.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
I got negative 0.38. So I'm just like
radically centrist
on the left, but just really hugging that line.
Yeah, I'm actually genuinely surprised I came out more left wing on economics than you. All right, how about the all important libertarian versus authoritarian?
I got negative 5.03.
Man, you're just like a straight up libertarian. I got negative 4.62. So yeah, we're both. I mean, I guess I fit the left libertarian meme to some extent, but outside of that, yeah, it's about what I expected.
Yeah, I mean, technically we're both left libertarians, and we're in that quadrant.
Yep.
I don't think that it would be disingenuous to describe me as a centrist or a libertarian, or I think classical liberalism might be the political philosophy that I most identify with, but I'm not really going to. I'm trying to avoid getting tribal with it.
I agree. Classical liberalism is probably also the best descriptor. I try and avoid that specific label, at least on the internet, just because it's kind of a meme. That's why I stick with strategically libertarian.
Okay. So you prefer a meme that's intentional?
Yes.
Something you've made your own. Yeah, that's.
Well, I mean, you get into the tribalist stuff. You know, in terms of if you're talking politics on the internet, I just don't want to be associated with the very loud classical liberal groups, the various skeptics and everything, because I think they're kind of profoundly embarrassing.
So, like, I mean, the way I look at it, like, if I listen to a philosophical group or a political camp for long enough, and I can't find, if I'm not able to find something that I strongly disagree with in the things that they're saying, and whatever's like a commonly accepted mainstream idea in that camp, then like I kind of feel like if you described me as someone who is in that group, I guess it would be a fair statement to make.
Yeah. Anyway, this has been going on for quite a while now. Wow.
Okay.
Almost 3.5 hours. But we just wanted to kind of give you guys an overview of where we're coming from, kind of what we value, where we stand, just to give you an idea of our biases when we talk stuff in the future.
Yeah, and this is I can only speak for myself, but I assume the same is true for you, that whatever our positions are, they're amenable to change with whatever evidence is available, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you had me take this test 5 years ago, I probably would have been way less libertarian and way more left wing. So,
yeah,
people change. So should their politics.
All right. So I think that's going to be it. So we'll just sign off here, and thanks for listening or watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Talk to you guys later.